Chapter 426. Dean was near the cave. He relied on thermal vision to capture some monsters that came out to forage at night. He slaughtered them and brought them back to the cage. He threw 2 sickle zombies into the cage. The sickle zombies were large enough to fit directly into the cage. Their heads weren't chopped off. Dean threw them into the cage. They roared and rushed towards the splitter. The little splitter was frightened at first, but soon it was angry as if its dignity was insulted. It rushed forward, and the 2 sickle zombies were quickly chopped into pieces by its sharp limbs. Dean looked at them and threw the lower bodies of the 2 sickle zombies a few meters away from the cage. Then he killed the other prey and placed them more than 10 meters away from the cage. Dean clapped his hands and looked at Splitter, who was roaring in the cage. He didn't stay any longer and left. The sky was beginning to dawn. Dean moved forward at full speed. He met some monsters along the way, but he was too lazy to pay attention to them. The monsters chased him crazily, but they couldn't catch up with Dean after chasing for more than 10 miles. They slowly abandoned their prey. In front of the giant wall, Dean took off his armor. The sticky transparent wings on his back gently stretched out and slightly trembled. He felt his body slowly float up. Immediately, his feet stepped on the giant wall. With the help of the wings, he ran up the giant wall. The more he ran, the faster he ran, faster than on the ground. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, Dean ran to the giant wall. He felt that his chest was frozen. He folded his wings and quickly put on his armor. His body shivered slightly, but soon it was warm again. He continued to run along the giant wall. Half an hour later, he came to a corner. He continued to run along the corner. According to the map, the giant wall of Sylvia was square, like the ancient city walls of the Celestial Empire, except that there were no watchtowers or signal towers. Dean suddenly came up with an idea. It seemed that he could sneak into the inner wall directly from the top of the giant wall. This idea made him excited, but he calmed down after thinking about it. He knew nothing about the inner wall. Even if he could sneak into the inner wall, it would be meaningless. Moreover, there were people like the dragon girl in the inner wall. If he was careless and provoked someone, then his identity would be exposed. The gains wouldn't make up for the losses. He gradually saw a vast and magnificent building. He was shocked as he looked down from the top of the giant wall. He had a bird's-eye view of the entire landscape from the top of the giant wall. The stronghold that they had just passed was like a black dragon that stretched into the distance. Behind the stronghold was a vast suburb filled with desolate villages. At this moment, in some of the villages, they could see some dark-skinned barbarians walking around, holding crude weapons. Clearly, they were the low-ranking barbarian soldiers. Behind these suburbs was the Golden Wall. At this moment, the sky was dimly lit, and there were already countless ant-like black dots moving about on the Golden Wall. They were all the wall builders. There were neatly arranged buildings behind the Golden Wall. It was the southernmost scenery of the commercial district. Dean looked up to the front. There were densely packed buildings extending into the distance. At the end of the buildings there was a giant wall in the hazy mist. It was the high wall of the inner wall area. It had a history of more than 200 years. Its height was more than half of the giant wall of Sylvia. It was said that countless wall builders had died during the construction of the inner wall. The project was extremely huge. Dean's heart was moved. He didn't want to sneak in for the time being. He just wanted to peep at the scenery of the inner wall from the giant wall of Sylvia. Wouldn't it be good? He didn't want to enter the inner wall in the future. Thinking of this, he made up his mind and immediately continued to run forward. More than an hour later, the huge gray outline in Dean's eyes finally became clear. He crossed the entire width of the outer wall and came to the inner wall. He had been running at full speed for more than an hour. With the help of the wings, his speed was 5 times faster than the fastest horse. He was so tired that his whole body was drenched in sweat. The soft layer of the armor was soaked. Fortunately, the soft layer had the effect of absorbing sweat, so he didn't get wet. Who? Who? Dean gasped for breath as he leaned on the giant wall to rest. He looked at the wall of the inner wall. The wall was extremely tall. It cut off the entire outer wall from north to south. It was like a huge gate. The width of the inner wall was about 40 to 50 meters. It was 3 times wider than the most prosperous street in the commercial district. The ground was shrouded in the shadow of light behind the high wall. It was a vast forest overgrown with weeds. In the distance there were lakes, sandy lands, and tall mountains. But as far as the eye could see, there was no sign of a village within a dozen miles. It was extremely spacious. Dean was startled as he looked at it. In his impression, the inner wall should be an extremely prosperous and lively place. The scenery was beautiful. The top people of the giant wall lived there. Even the aristocrats like the Mel family were expelled from the inner wall. It could be seen that the people in the inner wall were the elites of the elite. However, this desolate scene subverted his worldview. Dean suppressed the doubts in his heart and continued to run forward. The closer he got, the clearer it became. Dean ran to the opposite line of the inner wall. He looked at the straight wall. The golden wall was more than 30 meters high. It was like a small threshold. It was not even a threshold. It could only be regarded as a small wrinkle. Behind the high wall was a vast plain. The plain stretched very far. There were mountains at the end. There seemed to be snow on the top of the mountain. There were lakes in the plain, but there were no villages or towns. Dean found it inconceivable that such a large area was empty. Even the most dilapidated slums in the outer wall wouldn't have such a large area that was empty. He suddenly thought of the shape on the map. The shock in his eyes slowly calmed down. The soil of the entire giant wall was occupied by the inner wall. Nearly 80% of the soil was in the inner wall. But the outer wall and the radiation area only accounted for 20%. This vast plain was a rare territory in the outer wall. But in the inner wall, perhaps it was a relatively unvisited wasteland. Dean decided to move forward. After walking for a while, Dean suddenly saw a huge shadow galloping in the grassland at the end of the plain. Behind the shadow, there was a very small sesame-like black grain chasing after it. Dean suddenly saw that the shadow in front of him was actually a huge monster that was more than 10 meters long. Its body was like a centipede with countless side feet, and its tail was high up like a scorpion with barbs. The person chasing the centipede monster turned out to be a very young boy, about 16 or 17 years old, almost the same age as Dean. His face still had the childish look of a teenager, holding a huge sword in his hand, chasing the centipede monster at full speed. Centipede! Dean was surprised. This was a level 22 monster. Moreover, it was a highly toxic monster. It was extremely difficult to deal with. Even an intermediate hunter would die if they encountered it. Even senior hunters wouldn't be willing to hunt this thing. If they were careless and got poisoned, most of the antidote would be difficult to save. Whoosh! All of a sudden, the youth chasing after it threw out a chain, clamping down on the barbs at the end of the 100-legged devil centipede's tail, pulling it back. The centipede struggled and swung its tail. It turned around and rushed towards the boy. The boy was holding a huge knife that was half the height of his body. He jumped up and stepped on the centipede's body. He cut a huge wound on the centipede's body. One man and one beast fought together. After a moment, the boy threw the huge knife and the centipede's head was cut off. The centipede suddenly stopped struggling. Its body slightly twisted. Dean was shocked. He didn't think that the people of the inner wall would be so strong. It was the first time that he saw someone of the same age as him. The boy pulled out the huge knife and tied the chain to the centipede's tail. He dragged the centipede away. Dean immediately followed the boy. He wanted to peep at the place where the boy lived. Suddenly, the boy stopped and looked back at the sky. Dean was shocked when he saw him turn his head. He quickly shrank his body and hid under the edge of the giant wall. After a moment, He pulled out the dagger and wiped it clean. He raised it slightly and looked at the boy with the help of the reflection from the side of the dagger. Although the image of the metal object was blurred, especially from a distance of a kilometer, he could see the boy standing quietly on the ground without any movement. Chapter 427. Dean was relieved as he saw the youth turn around and continue to drag the centipede. He didn't expect the youth's senses to be so sensitive. He didn't know what would happen if the youth saw him. He also didn't know what kind of status the youth had in the inner wall. What level of strength did the dragon girl belong to in the inner wall? What surprised him the most was that there were monsters in the inner wall. Wasn't it similar to the outer wall? How could the monsters come to the inner wall? Wasn't it easy to annihilate the monsters in the inner wall with the strength of the dragon girl? He couldn't think of a reason, but he was glad that he hadn't rashly gone against the light church and the military. Otherwise, if he had forced these two forces into a corner, who knew what kind of trouble it would have brought? As the saying goes, if you want to deal with the Holy Church and the military, then you have to find a way to control their strength in the inner wall. There were some doubts in his heart as he thought of this. The last barbarian attack had put the commercial district in danger. The military should have asked for reinforcements from the inner wall. But there was no response from the inner wall. Did the inner wall not care about the life and death of the outer wall? Or did the military not ask for reinforcements from the inner wall? Did they have other cards up their sleeves? However, there was another possibility. It was that the barbarians did something so that the inner wall didn't send reinforcements. But it meant that the barbarians could contact the inner wall. There was a big background behind them. However, the barbarians lived in the radiation zone and the inner wall. There was an outer wall area between them. It was difficult to get in touch with the people in the inner wall. Perhaps it was the barbarians from the inner wall that colluded with the barbarians. But there were more problems. Dean frowned. He felt that the problem was a bit complicated and thorny. He thought of a person that he had missed, Yvette, who was imprisoned in the military. Dean looked up at the boy who was far away. He thought about it and put away the idea of continuing to follow him. At the moment the sun had risen, and it was not early. He should go back. Moreover, with his current ability, it was not difficult to climb the giant wall. In the future, there would be opportunities to come back and see. Gwyneth was waiting at the station. She leaned on the carriage and covered her face with a straw hat. Dudian hadn't returned after one night. She was puzzled. Although she had become Dudian's maid, she still felt that it was difficult to understand the boy. The latter always seemed to hide something from her, so she couldn't understand his real cards. Suddenly, a smell drifted over. Gwyneth lifted the straw hat and looked at Dudian. She put on the straw hat and indifferently said, "Are we going back now? There's no hurry. Let's eat something first." Dean peeled off the tarpaulin in his hand. There were several pieces of bread inside. He took out one and put it in his mouth. He handed the rest to Gwyneth. "Eat." Gwyneth was startled. She took one of them and said, "I can't eat so much." "You don't need to lose weight. You're already beautiful." Dean casually said a famous phrase and smiled. He handed the tarp to her and turned around to get into the carriage. Gwyneth was startled as she heard Dean's words. She silently put away the pieces of bread and shook the rope. The horse was startled and immediately neighed and ran away. As soon as he came to the front of the castle, Dean saw that the gate was surrounded by reporters from various newspapers. He could not help but raise his eyebrows. Suddenly, he thought of something. There were 3 days left before his lecture. It was estimated that the aristocratic circle of the entire commercial district was paying attention to every move here. Many people with better eyesight noticed the carriage. They withdrew from the gate like a swarm of ants. They moved towards the carriage. Gwyneth's expression was indifferent. She didn't have the slightest intention to slow down. She shook the rope and the carriage rushed forward at a faster speed. The people who came to encircle Dean were scared and hurriedly moved to the side. Although the interview was profitable, but their lives were the most important. Moreover, if they were injured or killed by Dean's hooves, they wouldn't be able to receive compensation for their injuries. Not to mention that the genius master would use his life to compensate for their injuries. Noyce, who was guarding the gate, saw the carriage and opened the gate. The carriage rushed into the manor and stopped in front of the castle. Dean got off the carriage and shook his head as he heard the shouts from outside the manor. He entered the castle. "Master, you're back." Crone greeted him. Dennis and Glenn were sitting in the hall. They were enjoying breakfast. They got up and greeted Dean when they saw him. He went upstairs to change his clothes. He put on a soft and warm sweater and went back downstairs. He looked at Glenn, who had finished breakfast. "Go to the military and help me bring back a person. Her name is Yvette. She is the barbarian royal family member that I have arrested. The military has promised to hand her over to me after the interrogation. This is my medal." He handed his knight medal to her. Glenn was surprised. She didn't think that Dean's power was so big that he could get the barbarian royal family from the military. But she was relieved as she thought about the fact that Dean had donated the legendary item for free. She nodded. "I'll go now." Dean nodded and sat at the table. He called Crone to serve the meal. After 10 minutes, a sumptuous breakfast was served on the table. Dennis was speechless when he saw the ingredients of the breakfast. He didn't think that Dean would eat so extravagantly even though he lived in such a simple house. Dean felt a lot warmer after breakfast. The biting cold feeling was dispelled. He went back to the study room to study the medical knowledge and exercise the flexibility of his left hand. He suddenly thought of the teenager he saw in the morning. He called Crone. "Go and send a message to the old man. Tell him to buy parasitic soul worms from the temple or the black market. The more precious the better." Dudian commanded. Now that he had power and wealth, he didn't need to personally go outside the giant wall to hunt. He only needed to spend money to buy them. Not only could he pick the type of parasitic soul worm that he liked, but the efficiency was also high. Outside the giant wall, to encounter a named monster, all depended on luck. Sometimes he would squat for a few months and he might not be able to find one. As for rare monsters, the probability was even lower. "Yes, young master." Crone thought for a while and was ready to leave. "Wait." Dean stopped him. "By the way, tell the old man to spread the news that I need parasitic soul worms. If other nobles are willing to provide rare parasitic soul worms, then they will have the opportunity to get a place as my student. If they provide rare parasitic soul worms, then they will get a place as a student and I will cultivate them wholeheartedly." Crone was startled for a moment. His eyes flickered as he replied, "I know." Afternoon. Dennis came back with a tall woman with wheat-colored skin. There was a big difference between the women in the giant wall. The barbarians in the radiation zone were generally tall and burly. Even the women were no exception. Yvette's height was the same as most regular knights. She was about 1.75 meters. Compared with the women in the giant wall, she was almost a crane in a flock of chickens. Even most of the men in the giant wall didn't have such a height. In addition to the figure, the skin color was also very different. Even the women in the slums who didn't bathe all year round didn't have such a skin color. Although the body was dirty, but at least the face could be seen. Yvette obviously had a problem with her skin color. Chapter 428. "Master, the person you want has been brought back," Dennis said. Dean nodded and turned to go upstairs. "Send her to my study room." "Yes, master." Dennis nodded. Dean came to the study room not long after. Dennis sent Yvette up. "Master, is there anything else you want me to do?" "You go back first. Tell the others to leave too. Don't come close or disturb me." Dean sat on the sofa as he poured tea. Dennis nodded and gently closed the door. Only Dean and Yvette were left in the study room. Dean poured 2 cups of tea and glanced at Yvette. He saw her numb expression and dull eyes. She didn't say a word. She just stood there in a daze. He smiled and said in English, "Don't pretend. Come and sit down." Yvette's expression was wooden. She didn't respond. Dean raised his eyebrows. He raised his hand and waved it in front of her. He was about to open his mouth when Yvette suddenly reached out her hand towards Dean's throat. Dean's eyes lit up. He leaned back and hit her shoulder. Her body was pushed back and hit the door. Dust fell off the door frame. Yvette didn't hit him. She waved her hands and rushed towards Dean. Her fingers were like claws. Dean waved his arm and blocked one of her hands. He leaned sideways and cut into her chest. His shoulder hit her and pushed her back again. Dean didn't wait for her to stand firm. Dean's palm swept past her cheek and grabbed her throat. He tightened his grip. "Do you want to die?" Yvette's raised arm stopped. Her eyes were full of resentment as she stared at Dean. "You want to sneak attack me? Even if you kill me, you will die." Dean's expression was cold. "Moreover, you won't be able to kill me with your strength." Yvette bit her lips. Blood seeped out. She didn't notice it. She was still staring at Dean with resentment. She was like a beast that wanted to devour people. "Hate me?" Dean's face was cold. He didn't have the slightest sympathy. "I don't care what you think in your heart. You have to follow my rules unless you want to suffer 10 times more pain and humiliation." As he spoke, he slowly released his fingers. His gaze was as cold as a sword as he looked at Yvette's eyes that were filled with resentment. Yvette bit her lower lip as she heard Dean's words. She stared at Dean. Her eyes were full of hatred, resentment, anger, and faintly there was a trace of fear. Dean turned back to the sofa and sat down. He pointed to the opposite side and said, "Come and sit." Yvette clenched her teeth. Her hands trembled as if she was trying to restrain and endure. She slowly sat on the sofa opposite to Dean and stared at him. "What? Are you mute? Or did they cut off your tongue?" Dean picked up the teacup and handed it to her. Yvette's chest violently rose and fell. Her fingers were slightly clenched. Her eyes seemed to pop out of their sockets as she stared straight at Dean. Dean leaned back on the sofa and sneered. "You haven't learned anything else, but you have learned how to pretend to be mute. If you have the strength to hate me, then you might as well beg me. Maybe I can help you get revenge by killing the people who whipped you and humiliated you." When Yvette heard the word rape, her body slightly trembled. A trace of fear flashed through her angry and resentful eyes. Her face also paled a little. She slowly lowered her head. No one could see her expression. After a moment, her voice was hoarse and full of resentment as she said word by word, "All of this is because of you." Dean indifferently said, "If you know how to blame yourself for your stupidity, then at least you can make some progress in the future. If you continue to blame others, then you will only become a resentful woman. You should have known your fate when I captured you. You didn't have the courage to commit suicide. I saved your life. In the end, you shouldn't hate me but thank me." Yvette looked up with red eyes. "If you didn't say that you would save my life, then I would have already committed suicide. I wouldn't have been humiliated by you." Dean indifferently said, "You can't take revenge by committing suicide." Yvette bitterly looked at him. "What do you want? Can you help me? Will you help me?" "Whether I will help or not depends on your attitude." Dean picked up the tea and drank. "At least I can't see that you are begging me." Yvette almost spat out a mouthful of blood. She was so angry that she lowered her head and gritted her teeth. "You saved my life because you want to get some secrets from me. Even if I know, I won't tell you." Dean slowly said, "Look at me first." Yvette was startled as she looked at Dean. Her eyes were still full of hatred. Dean raised a finger. "First, as a member of the Giant Wall, I have to capture you since you have invaded our territory. This is my duty. Secondly, I promised to keep your life after I sent you to the military. Now that you're still alive, I've done what I said I would do. Third, there is no mouth in this world that I can't pry open. I can apply the military's means to you 100 times more." Dean suddenly smiled. "In addition, I want to remind you that even if you commit suicide, it will still be valuable for me. I can dissect your body and peel off your skin to see if your bones are the same as those of the people inside the giant wall. I can transport your flesh and blood to your tribe so that they can taste it. Oh, and your head. Your facial features are so delicate. I can empty your brain and make it my chamber pot." Yvette looked at the teenager's smiling expression. She couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. "Are you threatening me?" Dean shook his head. "Why would I threaten you? I'm just telling you a fact. Even if you die, I believe that your tribe won't want to see your body being ruined by us. I can still get what I need. It's just a bit troublesome. I like efficiency. I hate any inefficient methods, so I don't want to do things that I hate. Do you understand?" Yvette was so angry that her chest violently heaved up and down. She gritted her teeth and said, "As long as you help me get revenge, I will tell you everything I know. But you have to help me kill those damn dwarf pigs first. It's better to save time." "Why do you want to waste so much time?" Dean smiled. "The people who whipped you and raped you won't be able to run away. I'll solemnly introduce myself to you. My name is Dean. I have 2 main occupations. The first one is a master of the Temple of Element. The second one is a Golden Knight of the Knight's Hall. So you can fully believe that your request is very simple for me." Yvette was startled. She was a member of the royal barbarian family who regarded the outer wall as an enemy since childhood. She was familiar with the 2 forces that Dean was talking about, but she couldn't believe that this teenager who looked younger than her had such a lofty status. Moreover, such a person would personally go to the battlefield? "This is my Knight's Honor Medal. This is the Master Medal." Dean took out 2 medals from his pocket and threw them on the table. "I won't say anything more if you don't recognize this medal." Yvette was surprised as she recognized the Knight's Honor Medal at first glance. She picked it up and carefully looked at it. She confirmed that it wasn't fake. She couldn't help but look at Dean in shock. You didn't lie?" Dean said. "Is it necessary to lie to a prisoner like you?" Yvette's eyes twitched. She found out that the teenager's mouth was very poisonous. She took a deep breath. "All right, I believe you. What do you want to know?" "I want to know everything that you know," Dean slowly said. "By the way, I don't like troublesome people. I hope that you can tell me everything at once. Otherwise, I don't mind using hard means to force you to speak. I can guarantee that my means will be more effective than the military. At least I can find thousands of people to rape and humiliate you. But they won't be so bold." Yvette's expression changed as her eyes flickered. Dean faintly said, "By the way, I'll tell you one more thing. You barbarians have been defeated and expelled from the Golden Wall. If you don't believe me, then I'll let my attendants take you to the Golden Wall to see the scenery there. In addition, I'll tell you one more thing. The reason why you barbarians were defeated was because I created a legendary weapon to expel you from the Golden Wall." Yvette's face changed color and said in shock, "Impossible, we can't lose. I said that I can take you to verify it. There is no need to lie to you." Dean indifferently said, "Now the military is considering whether to attack the barbarians' headquarters. They are thinking about the loss of the war. I have a lot of weapons in my hands. I can help the military to completely exterminate your barbarians. But I don't want to do that. If you are willing to believe me, then I can give you a place in the outer wall in the future as long as you give me a few years. Moreover, no one will expel you from the outer wall. So, I hope you can be honest and be good to both of us." Chapter 429. The fragrance of tea filled the study room. Dean stared at Yvette as he asked all the questions in his mind. He listened to her answers while paying attention to her heart and the blood vessels in her body. He could clearly see the heartbeat of the latter under the thermal vision. This would help him to detect if she was lying. Inner wall? I don't know about it. Even if there is, I have no right to ask about it. Yvette replied honestly. Dean looked at her heartbeat. He nodded. All right, my questions are over. I didn't expect you to be the little princess of the barbarian royal family. I will take revenge for you. Biting her lips, Yvette's eyes flashed with a trace of resentment. I hope to kill them in the most vicious way possible. No problem. Dudien readily agreed. Yvette stared at him. How do you know that? They did that to me? Dean saw that there was a trace of shame in her voice. The coldness in his eyes softened a bit. I believe that any senior hunter would be able to smell the dirty smell on your body. Go and take a bath. Yvette was startled and her face turned pale. She subconsciously covered her lower abdomen with her hands, but then she realized that this action was indecent. She gritted her teeth and said, I'll go first. Dudien got up and opened the door. He called out to Crone in the corridor. Crone ran up. Master, take her to take a bath. Dean said. Yes. Crone immediately turned his head and said to Yvette, Miss, please. Dean's eyes lit up as he watched Yvette leave with Crone. According to Yvette, their ancestors came from the inner wall, but because of the war they were expelled to the outer wall. Later they were expelled to the radiation zone. They stayed in the radiation zone for more than 200 years. At that time the giant wall of the inner wall was built. There are consortiums involved in the war. In addition to Mellon Consortium, Huasheng, Green and Scott Consortium are involved. The merchants won't move if there is no profit. There is no need to worry about the collapse of the inner wall. Dean narrowed his eyes. The military should be aware of this point, but they couldn't investigate it. If he didn't take the initiative, then the military wouldn't be able to bring down the Mellon Consortium even if they got the evidence. It seemed that there was a contradictory balance in the seemingly complex situation. Perhaps this was what the inner wall wanted? Unfortunately, Yvette was just a little princess of the king of barbarians. Although she was talented in fighting, in the barbarian social system, women were forbidden to participate in military discussions. According to her, although her father was the chief of all tribes and the king of all barbarians, there were more than 50 children of the king of barbarians. Yvette was ranked 27th among the daughters, and she had 5 younger sisters, the youngest of whom had just learned to walk. If she was a man, then she would be able to touch the top secrets of the barbarians. Time flew by. 2 days passed. In the blink of an eye it was the day of Dean's public lecture. In the last 2 days old Foulin had sent the parasitic soul worms for Dean to choose from. There were 16 parasitic soul worms. Most of them were ordinary parasitic soul worms. They could be used as magic marks to become ordinary hunters. The transformation of the body was weak and the increase in strength wasn't big. Moreover, their ability was relatively ordinary. They could make the body more resistant to heat or hunger. But their role in combat was negligible. In addition to the ordinary parasitic soul worms, there were 4 rare parasitic soul worms. They could be used as hunters. Dean was surprised that there was a rare parasitic soul worm among the 16 parasitic soul worms. This rare parasitic soul worm came from the swallower. It was at the same level as the magic marks of the infected. Its ability was to provide a strong digestive ability. Not only could it digest the flesh and blood of the undead, which contained viruses, but it could also digest the flesh and blood of poisonous monsters. Its intestines could be said to be immune to poison. It could eliminate most of the viruses, bacteria, and parasites. In addition, it could also digest metals, poisonous plants, bark, stones, and so on. Of course, he needed to reach the level of a senior hunter in order to evolve such a high-level ability. In addition to the terrifying digestive ability, the swallower magic mark also had a good attack effect. The strong acid in the stomach could be shot out through the tip of the tongue to attack the enemy. As long as it was an intestine devourer, magic mark hunter, the tongue would gradually evolve into a hollow tube, connected to the stomach, and could use the strong acid in the stomach to make a sneak attack, which often had a miraculous effect in the battle. This is the swallower parasitic soulworm. I will give it to you, Noise. Dean called Jean and handed him the gray parasitic soulworm. Train well in the future and learn from Sergei and Gwyneth. Now your starting point is the same as them. Noise looked at the gray parasitic soulworm. Young master, this is a rare parasitic soulworm. I have my own magic mark. Dean laughed. It was a waste to use the rare parasitic soulworm as a promotion material. Ordinary parasitic soulworm was enough. Crone's expression turned ugly, but it soon disappeared. He looked at Noise and said, Young master gave it to you. Take it. Noise came back to his senses. He took the box and bowed. Young master, you are the one who pulled my life out of prison. Scar and I swore allegiance to you. I will do the same in the future. No matter what you ask me to do, I am willing to die. Dudian laughed. Well then you should die now. Noise almost choked. He looked up in shock. Don't be so mushy. Go. Dean waved his hand. Noise reacted and his face turned red. He saluted again and then left. Dean looked at Crone. Which family gave the swallower magic mark? Who is the person they recommended? Crone turned around and handed over the register in his hand. Dean took a look and wrote down the name. You go out first. Tomorrow is the day of my lecture. Prepare for it. Yes, young master. Crone looked at the 4 bottles of rare parasitic soulworms on the table. After he left, Dudian closed the window and added a few pieces of dry wood to the fireplace. Then he sat by the fireplace and took off his coat, exposing his upper body. His skin was as white as snow, but his body was covered with intricate whip marks and sharp blade scars. Some of the scars were shocking, especially the steel nail scars on his shoulder blade, which still left a round scar. His divinized magic mark was in the middle of these scars on his chest. It was like a sharp sword lying across his chest. Dean gently touched for a moment and picked up the parasitic soul worm next to him. He began to absorb the parasitic soul worm from the ordinary ones. He was already at the limit of intermediate level before he got the magic mark. His physique had reached the bottleneck. It was useless to absorb more God's blessings because the magic mark was connected to the body. God's blessings were not to strengthen the body but to strengthen the magic mark. The magic mark had stages. When a stage reached saturation, it was necessary to use the body of other parasitic soulworms as nourishment to step into the next stage. Dean took out the ordinary parasitic soulworm from the bottle and injected it into the magic mark on his chest. 1, 2, 3. Chapter 430. In the blink of an eye, Dean injected 5 parasitic soulworms into the magic mark on his chest. The magic mark only bulged a little, and then calmed down at a very slow speed. Dean raised his eyebrows. Generally, a hunter only needed 4 parasitic soulworms to promote from intermediate to senior level. If he was unlucky, 5 or 6 would be enough. Unless he was extremely unlucky, he needed 7 or 8 to satisfy his magic mark's appetite. Looking at his situation now, it seemed that he belonged to the category of extremely unlucky people. After injecting 5 parasitic soulworms, there was no feeling at all. Dean could only continue to inject. Anyway, with his current status, it was easy to get parasitic soulworms. He just needed to hook his finger and someone would send them to him. He didn't need to squat outside the giant wall to hunt for parasitic soulworms. If he didn't get the magic mark, he would become a monster's meal. 6, 7, 8, 9 With the ingestion of more and more parasitic soulworms, Dean finally felt a slight pulse in the magic mark on his chest. It seemed to be slightly trembling. This was a precursor of evolution. He was surprised and continued to inject parasitic soul worms. In the blink of an eye, he injected 2 parasitic soul worms. The magic mark on his chest trembled more and more intensely. At the same time, it emitted a heat that spread throughout his body. His body, which was originally cold, seemed to have warmed up under this hot current. It seems that it's not enough. Dean stared at the magic mark on his chest. He waited for a moment, but found no other movement. He couldn't help but be speechless. He was not extremely unlucky, but extremely unlucky. Was it because of the legendary magic mark? He looked at the remaining 4 rare parasitic soul worms and hesitated for a moment. Finally, he clenched his teeth and grabbed a bottle. He took out a green parasitic soul worm and injected it into his magic mark. Although using rare parasitic soul worms to promote his soul worm was an absolute wastrel, Dean didn't care so much. These things could be bought again. For him, he could easily exchange them for any kind of invention. If he continued to wait for others to send him ordinary parasitic soul worms, the time was too slow, and he was not sure if someone would send them. And he never liked to wait. With the injection of this rare parasitic soul worm, Dean suddenly felt the heat in his chest boiling, as if he was suddenly ignited by a fire. His whole body felt a burning sensation, and his pores expanded, oozing out a lot of sweat. Dean took a light breath. He had this feeling that the breakthrough was imminent. He grabbed another bottle and took out a rare parasitic soul worm and injected it into his magic mark. Suddenly, his whole body felt like it was about to explode. He felt as if his brain had been hit by a volcano. His mind was full of heat and his consciousness was blurred by this heat. However, he could vaguely feel that there seemed to be something twisting in his chest. When he felt this, he suddenly remembered the time when he had absorbed the Splitter's parasitic soul worm. The parasitic soul worm had tried to drill into his brain. Suddenly, his pores shrank and his whole body was frightened. He looked down and saw that the shape of the magic mark on his chest was changing. If it was a small sword mark before, then now it was like a finger-long sword chopstick in the middle of his chest. The change of the magic mark meant that the promotion was successful. Dean took a deep breath. He felt that his whole body was hot, wet, and full of sweat. He pulled the towel next to him to dry his body. He felt that his hand was very light, as if his arm suddenly became thousands of pounds lighter. His thoughts moved, and his arms stretched out unexpectedly. I don't know if there are any new abilities after being promoted to senior hunter. There was a glimmer of expectation in Dean's eyes. Compared to his own physical increase, he was more looking forward to the new ability. If it was a better ability, the effect would be much greater than brute force. However, life was not a game after all. There was no attribute list. He could only slowly explore it. Fortunately, he had learned how to explore his own ability when he deified the magic mark last time. This time, he still did the same, starting from his eyes. When he was ready to experiment with his eyes, he suddenly found a strange thing. He could actually see the cabinet. He was facing the fireplace at the moment. The cabinet was behind him, but he could see it. Dean was startled and suddenly overjoyed. He turned his head and faced the cabinet. He suddenly saw the fireplace behind him, and the flame inside was strong. The angle of my field of vision has expanded? Dean touched his eyelids. It was incredible. He suddenly thought of something. He quickly ran to the mirror and looked at himself. In the mirror, his eyes were like a human's. They weren't protruding out. He was relieved. But soon he noticed that there was a very light green color in his eyes. This touch of green was in the middle of the pupil. Dean looked closer and blinked. Yes, there was a touch of green in both of his eyes. Sure enough, the structure of the eyeball has changed. Fortunately, it's not big. Dean was a little relieved. As the ability of the hunters improved, their body would be subtly changed by the magic mark. It could be said that any senior hunter would have a part of their body that was different from a human. For example, Sergei had scales on his back. This was the result of his steel dragon magic marks. As for the other hunters, some of them had extremely long teeth that were exposed outside their mouths like ferocious fangs. Some of them had oddly colored, brightly colored hair. Some of them had skin like crocodile skin, rough and hard. Some of them had fingers that were like beast claws, long and ugly. All of the hunters' bodies would change. As their strength increased, more and more parts of their bodies would change. Many of them had mutated parts on the surface which made them look like monsters. This was the reason why hunters always lived in the dark. They were rejected by the nobles and feared by the civilians. My vision is a bit like that of an insect, but the surface structure of the eyeball is still the same as that of a human. There is no protrusion, and the eyelids have not degenerated. Dean looked down at his body, looking for other parts of the mutation. When he concentrated, he suddenly found that his line of sight seemed to fall into a bloody world. Suddenly, the scene in front of him changed, and he saw a skeleton. And this skeleton was him. He was so shocked that he almost fell down. When he moved his gaze away from this strange scene, his mood calmed down a little, and his pupils seemed to relax. When he looked again, he suddenly found that the skeleton from before was gone, and it was still himself made of flesh and blood. Dean was startled for a moment. Suddenly he was overjoyed. His vision seemed to have gone a step further. He could directly see the bone marrow. Moreover, the most important thing was that he seemed to be able to control his vision. It was not fixed like before. Otherwise, he would see everyone as a skeleton. It was no different from living in a kingdom of the undead. The most important thing was that he would get face blindness. The angle of sight seems to be more than 270 degrees. I can also see the skeletons inside the body. It belongs to the medium-high perspective ability, and I can control it freely. Dean was pleasantly surprised. It must be known that although a normal person's single-eye field of vision was about 150 degrees, the area where the two eyes overlapped was the area where people could see clearly. This area was 120 degrees. In most cases, people could only see clearly in the 90-degree range. The more focused the attention, the smaller the field of vision. Usually, when the attention was focused on one thing, the field of vision would be reduced to less than 1/5. Chapter 431. Splitter is an extreme attack type monster. There is such a big change in vision. I guess the improvement in combat would be even stronger. Dean couldn't help but look forward to it. He tested smell and hearing one by one according to the previous experiment sequence. Through the experiment, Dean found that his hearing and smell were still confused. When he pinched his nose, he could distinguish the sourness, sweetness, bitterness and spiciness of the smell through his hearing. When he blocked his ears, he could smell the sound emitted by the smell. It was not much different from before, but the intensity had increased. The range was nearly twice as wide as before. He could clearly smell the many smells mixed in the air, and the subtle sounds from all over the castle, including a corner of the kitchen. There was a squeaking sound of something small gnawing on a hard object. It should be a mouse hiding there. Dean was disappointed that there was no new change in his hearing and smell. But after thinking for a while, he was relieved. Splitter was an extreme attack type monster. Its high-speed movement and attack required keen vision. But the need for smell and hearing was not so strong. Dean moved his body. After the test, he found that his physical strength was more than twice as strong as before. His wrist strength and grip strength were surprisingly strong. He could easily bend hard metal tools out of shape. Generally, when an intermediate hunter is promoted to a senior hunter, my physical strength will double. Some of them will increase by 1.5 times. According to the Dragon Girl, an intermediate hunter can hunt monsters around level 11 to 19. A more powerful intermediate hunter can hunt monsters around level 20. A senior hunter can hunt monsters around level 28 or 29. When I was an intermediate hunter, I was able to easily kill a level 27 monster. I didn't even have to rely on close combat skills. This means that my physique can cope with a level 30 monster, which is the limit of a senior hunter. Now I should be able to kill a level 40 monster. If I improve my combat skills, then I can kill a level 45 monster. Dean's eyes flashed. There was no modern punching machine here. He could only use the monsters outside the giant wall as a reference to evaluate his physical strength. But it was convenient. After all, the meaning of the existence of a hunter was to hunt monsters. It was more valuable to know the level of monsters he could kill than to know his specific strength. My magic marks are still at the senior hunter stage, but the increase in strength is far stronger than ordinary senior hunters. The dragon girl was sent to hunt level 68 mature Splitter. I am still far from her. However, if the magic mark evolves again, maybe I can barely catch up with her. The potential of a deified legendary magic mark is stronger than her, unless she also has a deified legendary magic mark. Thinking of this, the surprise in Dean's heart gradually calmed down. He looked down at his abdomen, and his pupils seemed to adjust slightly after being oppressed. Suddenly, he saw the bones and internal organs in his abdomen, as well as the white ice in his abdomen. However, in the range of 270 degrees of vision, he found that in addition to his abdomen, there was also a large piece of white ice in his left arm. The bones of his left arm seemed to be a bit transparent, like the structure of ice cubes. Seeing this, Dean was slightly surprised. Suddenly, he realized that perhaps the main reason for the abnormality in his abdomen came from his left arm. His abdomen was infected with a large amount of blood from other monsters. It was just a fuse that caused the changes in his abdomen. Otherwise, it was impossible to explain why his left arm turned into white ice while his right arm didn't have the slightest change. My left arm was directly absorbing the cold crystal. It was eroded by the cold and spread to my abdomen. So, the ice blood disease should be caused by the direct absorption of the cold crystal. Dean fell into thought. After a long time, he slowly recovered his thoughts and looked down at his body. Previously, he saw that he was full of bones, so he didn't take a closer look. Now he looked one by one and suddenly found that there were very strange changes in his body. First of all, the position and number of bones. He had seen the normal structure of human bones in the superchip, but his bones were somewhat deformed. It seems that there are 2 more forearm bones in my arm. The phalanges have become thinner, and there is a small phalange bone next to it. Dean looked at his body while trying to move his fingers. He grasped the bent metal tools next to him. Suddenly, he found that when he exerted force in his fingers, the small phalanges next to the phalanges were like a bracket supporting the phalanges, so that the phalanges could easily burst out a powerful force. Dean was startled and then came to his senses. No wonder I'm only a senior hunter, but my strength and speed are far beyond that of ordinary senior hunters. At the genetic level, I'm still a senior hunter, but the abnormal structure inside my body allows me to exert stronger strength and speed. Dean thought in his heart. The same material, different structure, played different effects. Compared to ordinary human beings, the structure of his body seemed to be much better. But these changes only enhance the physique. It seems that there are no other combat abilities. Dean looked at his whole body in doubt. Splitter was a monster with extreme attack. But in addition to the obvious changes in vision, there didn't seem to be any other changes in combat. This feeling was a bit strange. In terms of ability, his senses had greatly improved. Compared to other senior hunters who were good at perception, he was in no way inferior or even stronger. But perception was only incidental to Splitter. Like other combat-type hunters, some could control blood. Some were like Glenn, who had Black Weaver magic marks. She could burrow into the ground and shrink pores to hide her breath. Some were like the infected, who could enhance their sense of smell and immunity, as well as the ability to absorb cold crystals and night vision. But for now, the Divine Eye's splitter magic marks didn't give him many abilities, even fewer than the rare magic marks. Is it possible that the ability has evolved, but I haven't noticed it? Can't the ability be stimulated by ordinary tests? Dean thought in his heart. If this was the case, then maybe he would be able to stimulate the ability when he encountered a well-matched opponent. After all, some abilities would be instinctively displayed in times of crisis. Temple of Elements, Drudge Mountain, Blessed Forest. The castle extended from Mount Degia to the front of the forest. The outermost edge was the divine castle where the apprentice oracles and primary oracles lived. As the hierarchy continued to the front of the forest, the divine castle outside the forest was the divine castle of the deputy temple lord. It was magnificent and the manor was vast. A large number of temple staff were taking care of the strange flowers and plants in the manor, as well as the strange trees. There was a lonely castle by the lake in the depths of the forest. It wasn't large and the construction wasn't magnificent. There were some common fruits and vegetables planted in the manor. There was no staff of the temple to take care of them. There was an old man wearing ordinary linen clothes. He was carrying a kettle and was watering the manor. He was taking care of the vegetables. He was holding a small hoe in his hand. He was removing the weeds next to the vegetables. He looked like an old fruit farmer. Woo! Suddenly, a giant black shadow jumped out from the back of the manor and rushed towards the old fruit farmer. It was a giant leopard dog. It was nearly 3 meters tall and had strong limbs. There was no fat on its body. There were brown spots all over its body. There was a sharp horn on the top of its head. Its eyes were dark golden amber. It was full of killing intent. It moved as fast as lightning and arrived in front of the old fruit farmer in the blink of an eye. It opened its mouth but didn't bite the old fruit farmer. Instead, it jumped in front of the old fruit farmer. It was like a watchdog as it roared towards the outside of the manor. The old fruit farmer was in the middle of weeding when he saw this. He paused for a moment and raised his blurry eyes to look outside the manor. Lightning Sprout. Wow! A rare monster has been tamed to such an extent. Good job of the temple master. A burst of applause echoed from the depths of the forest. A tall figure slowly came out from the shadows. Roar! The giant black beast let out a low roar, full of demonstration. The old fruit farmer put down the kettle and straightened his body. His previously dim eyes seemed to shoot out 2 rays of cold light. He slightly narrowed his eyes and calmly said, "The war is over. What do you want from the inner wall?" At this moment, the figure in the shadows had completely walked out. It was a handsome young man, holding a 2-meter-long wooden stick in his hand. He wore an extremely simple white robe, which was like a huge bedsheet, curling his body sideways. The hand and shoulder that held the stick were exposed outside the robe. He looked like a monk, but he had a head of elegant golden hair. Chapter 432. Roar. The black monster, the lightning sprout, saw the young man approaching it. It suddenly took a few steps forward and roared ferociously. Electric sparks appeared on its forehead and all of its hair stood up like a sharp hedgehog. The young man's expression did not change, but a ray of light suddenly flashed in his eyes. The wooden stick in his hand gently knocked on the ground, making a light sound. He still seemed to be standing casually, but his posture was already stretched, as if he would attack at any time. The thunder sprout growled. Just as it was about to rush out, its body suddenly stopped and its eyeballs moved back slightly. The old man who watered the vegetables earlier stroked the thunder sprout's fur and slowly walked out. "You want to bring a person?" The old man patted the lightning sprout and calmly looked at the youth. "Is it the child who has created a new legendary item?" The youth smiled and said, "I only know that his name is Dean." The old man stared at him and slowly retracted his eyes. He gently touched the ears of the lightning sprout. The lightning sprout screamed and jumped back into the manor. "He is a real genius. Are you sure you want to kill him?" The old man turned around and slowly entered the fortress behind the orchard. The young man smiled, pushed open the door of the manor, and followed. He said, "This is the order of the higher-ups. This person used the power of the devil. If it wasn't for his good comprehension, I would have purified him. This time, I'm just sending him to the monastery to let him think about it. If he knows what's good for him, then, if you want to take him, then take him." The old man interrupted him. His voice was emotionless as he said, "You'd better leave. I don't welcome outsiders here." The young man was slightly startled. One of his feet was in midair. He paused for a moment as he looked at the old man's gradually disappearing figure. After a moment of silence, he slowly retracted his foot, bowed slightly, and turned around to leave the manor. The sun rose. The warm sun shone on the church mountain. A new day had arrived. The bell echoed on the top of the mountain, pushing away the morning mist. On the steps at the foot of the mountain, a black dot the size of an ant was moving forward. It was actually countless oracles of the divine hall dressed in luxurious clothes, walking the steps to the largest church castle in Mount Degia. Today was also the day that Dean announced to teach. It was 9 in the morning. It was 7 o'clock at the moment. All the architects got up and rushed to St. Peter's Cathedral. This was the place where the masters of the Temple of Elements gave their lectures. Since it was a public lecture, the lecture venue was the square in front of the cathedral. The square was very vast. It was 185 meters long and 160 meters wide. It could accommodate 100,000 people. There were a total of 108 towering pillars around the square. The statues of angels and goddesses were engraved on them, looking magnificent and magnificent. There were many people gathered in the square. Naturally, there weren't more than 100,000 architects from the Temple of Elements, but there were 20 or 30,000 of them. The more they stood in the front, the clearer they could hear. At the moment they were scrambling for the most conspicuous position in the front. Not only could they hear Dean's words, but they could also be chosen by him. There are still 2 hours before the lecture starts, and there are already so many people here. I guess there are already more than 10,000 people? There was a trace of amazement in Ivisa's eyes as he looked at the noisy scene. In the past there were tens of thousands of people who came to listen to their master's public lectures. It was a big scene and it was worth to be proud of in front of other masters. But now it was nothing compared to the scene in front of him. Today is his first public lecture, so it is inevitable that it will attract a lot of people. I estimate that at least 10,000 people will come. The total number of people in our temple is only around 30,000. He is going to become famous, a lean old man said with a complex expression. He was Arson who had a quarrel with Dean. Today he came with his friend Ivisa to watch the lecture. Ivisa sighed. Even the 2 of us have come. If the little guys don't come, then they will be too unmotivated. Arson's mouth twitched. I want to see what he is going to say. Being able to create inventions doesn't mean that he can explain them. Teaching is a test of the accumulation of professional knowledge. He has just become a master, but he dares to teach in public. He is arrogant. If he had studied in the library for 3 years, then maybe he would have become a useful person. Ivisa knew that there was still resentment in his heart. He shook his head and whispered, "He has already become a useful person." Arson choked and his face darkened. "Hey!" At this time a figure came from the side. It was a square-faced old man. He was wearing casual clothes. He smiled at the 2. "You 2 old guys also came? Do you want to see his lecture?" Ivisa looked up as he recognized the person. "Master Peter, you have come. What's the reason for us not to come?" Arson's face was still gloomy as he saw the old man. He turned his head and pretended not to notice. The square-faced old man walked over and said with a smile, "If he hadn't said that he would teach 10 days in advance, I really wouldn't have the time to come. I've been busy for a long time for this day. Now I've brought a few of my good-for-nothing students here to take a look." Ivissa laughed. "You are too polite. Carrie and Casper are senior architect. I estimate that it will take less than 2 years for them to become new masters. Your ability to teach students is the best among us." "I'm flattered." The square-faced old man laughed. Arson frowned. "It's useless to become a new master. If it wasn't for Dean, then they would be able to shine. But now that he has come out, the others will become foils." There was a trace of embarrassment on Ivissa's face. The square-faced old man's face slowly turned gloomy. He looked at Arson. "I heard that you had a conflict with the legendary master? Why? You can't compete with him, so you want to pull us in?" Arson's face changed as he didn't expect the old man to be so direct. He couldn't help but get angry. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Ivissa smiled awkwardly. "It's just a joke. Don't take it seriously." The square-faced old man coldly snorted. "Don't say a word? I'm not the one who started it. Some people are jealous of others because they can't compare with others. They don't work hard all day and are jealous of others. How dare they provoke me? Ridiculous." Arson angrily said, "Who are you talking about? I'm jealous of him? When I became famous, he was still in his mother's womb." The square-faced old man sneered. "You are old yet you want to compete with a child. Do you know that he wasn't born when you became famous? But now that you're about to be buried, you've been surpassed by others. You." Arson's body trembled in anger. The square-faced old man looked at him with a face full of mockery. "What are you two arguing about?" A voice echoed from the side. A thin old man came over. It was Skagen. Ivissa saw him and quickly said, "You persuade them." Skagen came over and looked at both of them. "Today is the big day of Dean's lecture. We shouldn't make trouble here. We should be happy that new seeds are growing in the new season. We have a legendary master in the temple. He will drive the temple in the future and completely change the life of the outer wall." The square-faced old man looked at him and smiled. "I think so too, but I hate it the most when people speak ill of others behind their back. Trying to sow discord? Really dirty. Humph, he's already so old, yet he doesn't practice any magic all day. I don't know what he's thinking. He made a name for himself when he was young, but when he's old, he only knows how to gnaw on the mountain of gold he earned when he was young. He likes to bully the younger generation when he has nothing better to do, and he always talks about respecting his elders. Such a person, the value of his life that he created when he was young is wasted when he's old." "You!" Arson glared at him. Skagen smiled and said, "All right, don't talk too much. Don't let the children laugh at you. A master should act like a master." Chapter 433. Outside the foothills of Mount Degia, a carriage came from afar. The coachman was a young girl dressed as a servant. She was beautiful and pleasant, but there was a stitched scar on her neck that looked like intersecting canine teeth. The girl reined in the horse's reins and stopped the carriage at the foot of the winding steps. She jumped off the carriage and opened the door. Her voice was emotionless. "We're here." Dean came out of the carriage. He tightened his master robe and said to Gwyneth, "Let's stop the carriage here. Come with me." Gwyneth nodded and ran to the side. She broke a branch and inserted it into the grass. She tied the rope and turned around to follow Dean. Today is really a lively day. Dean walked up the steps step by step. The black snow accumulated on the ground, and the green grass was desolate and withered. He could smell the smell and the faint noise from the top of the mountain. There was a smile on his face. There were some castles on the way to the church mountain. There was no shadow of a person inside. In a blink of an eye, Dean came to the outside of St. Peter's Church. He saw that the vast square was filled with figures. He turned around and walked towards the stone corridor. "Get out of here, Edward! You are just a pariah. Get out of here! Master Dean won't choose you as his student even if you stand in front of him. Get out of here! The stench of your body is making me sick." As soon as he reached the corridor, he heard a quarrel coming from the outer edge of the corridor. He saw 4 or 5 blonde and elegant figures gathered together, trying to squeeze into a suitable position. There were 2 brown-haired teenagers next to him. One was handsome, and the other was mediocre with freckles on his face. At the moment, the 2 shrank together and looked at the others, not daring to answer. Dean glanced at them and wanted to withdraw his eyes. But he saw that the brown-haired boy was clenching his fists tightly. Dean's eyes narrowed as he turned around and walked over. "Get out of here! It's a gift to allow pariahs like you to come and study here. How dare you fight with us? Pariahs, are you not convinced?" Several blond boys looked at them with disgust. Their faces were ugly as if they had been humiliated by the 2. Whoosh! Suddenly, a nimble figure appeared in front of them. It was Gwyneth. They were shocked by the sudden appearance of Gwyneth. Their eyes were attracted by Dean, who was behind Gwyneth. His luxurious golden robe was too conspicuous. "Master? Master Dean." They were confused. Dean didn't pay attention to them. He waved to the brown-haired boy, "Come here." The brown-haired handsome boy was a little stunned. He looked left and right, suspecting that he had misunderstood. He raised his finger to point at his nose and said, Me? It's you." Dean smiled. "Are you willing to be my student?" Hearing this, everyone was surprised. They looked at Dean with astonishment, and then looked at the handsome boy. The handsome youth felt as if his brain had gone blank. It took him a long time to react, and he stammered, Can I? Are you not willing?" Dean smiled. The handsome boy knew that it wasn't a dream. I'm willing. Master Dean, I'm willing to do anything you want me to do." "Come here." Dean beckoned. The handsome boy hurried over but was blocked by the stone guardrail. "What's your name?" "My name is Edward." Dean nodded and gently flicked his sleeves. Gwyneth jumped out of the guardrail. She lifted Edward's shoulder and jumped back into the corridor. "Come with me," Dean said. He didn't look at him anymore and continued to walk along the corridor. Edward felt as if he was in the clouds. He was in pain. It wasn't a dream. He was stunned for a moment as he looked at Dean's back. He quickly chased after him. Gwyneth followed behind Dean like a shadow. The blond boy and others looked at each other. They were at a loss. Dean's figure appeared in the corridor. All the people crowded in front of the church steps looked at him and cheered loudly. Edward was nervous and cramped as he felt the enthusiastic cheers and gazes around him. He didn't dare to stay too close to Dean, but he didn't dare to stay too far away. His heart was pounding and his face was red. Although Dean didn't look back, he noticed the embarrassment of his new student. He smiled. "From now on, you are my student. In the future, you will go further than all of them. Don't be nervous." Edward was shocked as he heard Dudian speak. "Yes, it's Master. Oh no, teacher. Do you know why I accepted you as my student?" Dudian asked as he walked. Edward shook his head blankly. He was just a little junior oracle with average talent. Not to mention his family. Although he did not have to worry about food and clothing among the commoners and was relatively wealthy, such conditions were definitely the lowest in the temple. He was a little nervous and said, "I don't know, teacher. Remember all the humiliation you have suffered since childhood. Do you understand?" Dean whispered. Edward's face slightly changed as he recalled the matter. He bowed his head. "I won't hate them, teacher." "You won't, or you don't dare?" "I don't dare." Edward hesitated for a moment but answered truthfully. "Why?" Edward plucked up his courage. "We are all part of the temple. We should unite and love each other. They are nobles with noble blood. I can't hate them." Dean turned to look at him. You can't or you don't dare? Edward looked into Dudien's eyes. He found that the genius master's eyes were very deep, like black stagnant water, but there was a mass of green in them. His heart beat wildly as he gritted his teeth. I dare not, Dean slowly said. As my student, you can't do anything that you don't dare to do. Do you understand? Edward was stunned. Dean's eyes narrowed as he turned around. He knew that it was difficult for him to change his mind. But he wasn't in a hurry. Hatred was the seed of rebellion. As long as it was cultivated, sooner or later it would grow into a towering tree. He looked into the distance outside the cloister and could vaguely see the vast and imposing Sylvia giant wall. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. You are here? Skagen smiled as he saw Dean coming from the corridor. You are right on time. It's almost 9 o'clock. The old man was surprised as he saw the two people behind Dean. Who are these two? She is my attendant and he is my new student. I hope you can take care of him in the future. Dean smiled as he introduced them. Ivissa was surprised as he looked at Edward. He is just a primary architect. There are many senior architects who want to be your student. Why would you accept a primary architect? Dean laughed. It's too difficult for senior architects to change their profession. It's better to accept someone who has no foundation. Skagen nodded. That's good. It makes sense. Arson sneered. Master Dean is worried that he won't be able to teach the high-level architects. Studying magic depends on your talent, but teaching others depends on the accumulation of knowledge. Master Dean is still young. He is qualified to teach these low-level architects. Arson sneered at the side. Hearing this, the atmosphere suddenly became a little stiff. Dean looked at him and whispered, Do you think that you don't have the talent for the invention? Arson's face slightly changed. Are you insulting all the masters? Don't think that you can be arrogant just because you have made a legendary invention. Dudien whispered. Isn't it too despicable for you to force hatred on me? I advise you not to do stupid things like provoking me in the future. Otherwise I don't mind kicking you in front of everyone. I believe that no one can stop me if I want to. Arson's face changed as he looked at Dean in anger. You, how dare you? Skagen and Ivissa tried to persuade him. Skagen looked at Dean. Today is a big day for you to teach. Don't lower yourself to his level. That's his temper. Dean didn't pay attention to them as he smiled at Arson. Since you asked me if I dare or not, I will give you an answer. He flicked his sleeves. Gwyneth's eyes flashed with a hint of hesitation, but she still moved. She appeared behind Arson as if she teleported. She lifted her foot and kicked his ass. Bang! Arson's body flew out and fell into the crowd below the high platform. It immediately caused an exclamation. The dense crowd spread out like a tide and gathered again to catch him. Skagen, Ivissa and others' faces changed as they ordered people to go and help him. I'm sorry. My men are not sensible. Dean flicked his sleeves and said to the crowd, It's time for the lecture. I'll go first. Then he turned and stepped onto the platform. Gwyneth followed behind him. This man has a temper. The square-faced old man looked at Dean's back as he stroked his beard and muttered. Skagen glared at him. You're still gloating. The old man laughed. Evil people will be punished by evil people. Edward, who was standing at the side, was dumbfounded. The Grandmaster in his eyes was actually kicked off the stage by his own teacher's follower. It was just a verbal conflict, and he dared to act like this. He was simply too hot-tempered. Chapter 434. Wow. Everyone in the square cheered as Dean stood on the high platform on the steps of the church. Dean took a deep breath as he looked at the crowd. He knew that this was the key moment for the establishment of the gas faction. He waited for the crowd to quiet down a bit. First of all, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Dean. I'm 16 years old. I'll be 17 years old after the black snow season. I know that people will despise my age, but Mr. Smorgo was only 19 years old when he painted the Saint of the Mirror. Mr. Elliot was 14 years old when he played the first great piece of music, Moonlight. Mr. Curtis was 28 years old when he wrote The Art of War. Everyone quieted down as they heard Dean's words. Skagen, the old man, and others looked at each other. They didn't expect Dean to bring up the most famous figures in history for comparison. They couldn't help but sigh. They knew that Dean's purpose was to make people think about the fact that he produced the first legendary item, new textile machine, when he was only 16 years old. In the same year, he produced the second legendary item and opened up a new system of items. Every great work will be criticized by people when it comes out, Dodian slowly said, but I hope that stubborn things like age and seniority won't affect your judgment of things. The audience was silent. Dean continued, Today I'm going to give a lecture, but in fact I'm going to discuss with you. I believe that everyone is curious about the gas faction. Many masters have mentioned about it in the past few days, but it's inevitable that they are too esoteric. Today I'm going to talk about the origin and application of the gas faction. Hearing this, everyone's eyes lit up and they perked up their ears to listen. Skagen, the old man, and the others were concentrating on Dean in the distance. The key to the gas faction is the gas faction. Just like the metal faction is the key to the metal. Dean said in an orderly manner, There are two things in the 9 great inventions that are inseparable from our lives. The first one is air and the second one is water. At this point, there was a commotion below the stage. The people present included the 9 major systems. Dean's words had undoubtedly lowered the position of the other systems. It was difficult to accept. Skagen and the old man's complexion slightly changed. Although they were masters, but they belonged to different factions. No one thought that their faction was inferior to other factions. Even Ivissa always believed that Lightning faction was the truth of the world. Dean felt the restlessness in the atmosphere. The reason is very simple. First of all, let's take the Lightning faction as an example. Will we die immediately if we leave the Lightning faction? The answer is no. Will I die immediately after leaving the metal magic? I won't. What if I don't use wood magic? Without these magic, our lives will only be a little worse, but we won't die immediately. Hearing this, many people felt a little better in their hearts, but they were still somewhat unconvinced. Master Dean, according to you, we will die immediately if we leave the air and water divine incantations? How is that possible? Someone in the crowd shouted loudly. The speaker was a young man. He had no intention of changing the direction of his research to study air magic. He had only come to listen to this genius master's lecture and see what amazing things he would say. He didn't expect that after a few words, he would be infuriated half to death. Yes, yes. I don't believe it. There were voices of agreement from the crowd. Dean raised his hand and waited for the crowd to calm down. We can verify it. First of all, what is the gas? As you can see, the most important thing is the air. Now you might as well cover your nose and mouth with your hands and refuse to breathe air. See how long you can last. Hearing this, everyone could not help but look at each other. Some of the primary architects in the crowd covered their noses when they heard Dean's words. However, some of the senior architects and intermediate architects didn't do so. They felt helpless as they knew what Dean was going to say. No one could live without air. Dean continued after a minute. You should understand now that you have verified it. Perhaps some of you will think that the role of air is to help us breathe. What is there to study? How can it compare to the mystery of the metal? How can it compare to the mystery of the lightning? How can it compare to the value of the wood faction? Many people in the crowd nodded slightly and looked up at Dean to see how he would answer. Dean smiled. Yes, the gas can't be used to make textile machines like the wood faction. Nor can it be used to make swords like the metal faction. Everyone was stunned and felt a trace of strange. Dean had the most right to speak when it came to textile machines. Dean slowly said, "The gas isn't a physical thing, so it can't create metal and wood faction. But it is a substance like lightning. It can create destructive power that metal swords can't match. You should understand this point from the steam gun. Perhaps some people think that the power of the steam gun depends on the metal bullet. Yes, the real way to kill the enemy is the metal bullets. But if there is no gas, then the metal bullets are nothing." Dean looked at the crowd. "Have you ever thought about it? What if the steam gun didn't eject metal bullets but something bigger? For example, our carriage." Carriage? Everyone was shocked as they heard Dean's words. Skagen, the old man, and the others were stunned. Suddenly, their eyes burst into light. If the gas can push the metal bullets, then why can't it push the carriage? Dean looked at the crowd. "Please imagine if you cast a huge carriage. You don't need horses to pull it. You just need to install 2 jets at the end of the carriage. The carriage will run faster than the horses. What kind of picture would that be?" The audience was silent. Everyone was stunned. Some of them fell into contemplation. Dean didn't give them time to think. "Does anyone have a bolder idea besides the carriage?" Bolder? Everyone was puzzled as they looked at Dean's confident expression. It was already shocking that the carriage didn't rely on the horses. Wasn't it bold? Chapter 435. Fly to the Sky. Those 3 simple words silenced the entire place. Skagen, the old man, and others were shocked as they looked at the figure on the high platform. They felt as if a window had been opened in their minds. They suddenly felt as if they had touched a vast world. It must be known that ever since the emergence of the gas theory, the masters of various fields had paid attention to it and studied it. They were very clear that the kinetic energy produced by gas would produce wonderful changes in various fields in the future. Although they knew that qi would become a big knowledge in the future, but they didn't dare to imagine that humans could use the kinetic energy of qi to fly to the sky. Flying. This was the ability of the gods in the Bible. The giant wall of Sylvia shrouded the world. Flying meant that humans could cross the giant wall. Humans who lived on the ground couldn't even think about flying to the sky. However, Skagen and the others knew that this kind of thing wasn't absolutely impossible. The square was silent. Dudian continued, "We all know archers. Archers shoot arrows and hit the enemy. The arrow is in the flying state. If we make something that is 100 times bigger than the bow and use people as arrows, can we make people fly? The elastic force of the bowstring is the driving force of the bow and arrow. The steam of the steam gun is the driving force of the metal bullet. We can walk and jump because of the power generated by the body. Humans can run faster and jump higher if the power is strong enough." Dudian slowly said, "It isn't difficult for humans to fly to the sky if we can cleverly use the power generated by qi. This is the charm of the qi faction. Imagine that in the future war, we can fly in the sky with the help of the qi faction while the enemy can only stay on the ground. How can the barbarians outside the fortress survive? If we can fly, then we can even cross the giant wall and travel to the distant world outside the giant wall." Everyone's mind buzzed as they listened to Dudian's clear voice. It was as if they had seen a new world. Flying. This was something they had never dared to think about. But what would the future be like if humans could fly in the sky with the help of the invention? Some architects' eyes lit up. They were full of excitement. Although Dudian didn't come up with strong evidence to support his theory, but as a legendary master, he was able to put forward such a point of view. Most importantly, such a point of view was extremely advanced. They had never thought about it and didn't dare to think about it. "Master, can we really use the invention to fly in the sky?" Someone in the crowd couldn't help but ask. "Yes, Master, we are so heavy. Can we rely on the thin air to help us fly?" Dean smiled as he heard the shouts. Do you know about kites? Kite? Everyone was at a loss. Some scratched their head as they felt that it was familiar. Dudian continued, It's a small invention that was born more than 100 years ago. Unfortunately, it wasn't popularized because of some reasons. If you are interested, then go to the library to find information about it. You will understand that it isn't difficult for us to fly in the sky. But don't underestimate the seemingly weightless air. Some people were surprised as they heard Dudian's words. They were ready to go to the library to find the magic kite that Dudian had mentioned. Skagen, the old man, and others were full of admiration as they heard Dudian's words. Kite? Why did he suddenly mention this forbidden technique? He is too bold. This is a forbidden thing. Didn't anyone remind him that the forbidden technique can't be publicized? Several masters frowned as they looked at Dudian. Some of them were worried for him, while others felt that Dudian was talking too much. Dudian was about to continue to introduce the basic knowledge of the air element. Suddenly a figure rushed out from the corridor on the side of the square. Assassin? Enemy attack? Dudian turned around and saw the figure. He was surprised. It was much faster than Gwyneth. Whoosh! The 100-meter distance was covered in the blink of an eye, and the figure stopped on the high platform, motionless, as if he had been standing there since the beginning. He was wearing a white robe, and the material of the white robe was soft, without any unnecessary decorations. Half of his shoulder was exposed, and he was holding a wooden stick in his hand. At the end of the stick was a dazzling gemstone the size of a baby's fist. The gemstone was crystal clear, and it could cause countless noble ladies to scream. The sudden appearance of the figure caught the attention of the audience. Everyone was surprised. They didn't see when the stranger arrived. They only felt that there was one more person on the platform. Gwyneth's pupils shrank as she stood 3 meters behind Dudian. She put her hand on her dagger and stood in front of Dudian to protect him. Her palms were full of cold sweat. Saint from the inner wall. Skagen, the old man, and others were shocked when they saw the figure that suddenly appeared. They didn't expect a saint to suddenly appear here. They were bewildered for a while. Shameless boasting. The blonde youth glanced at Gwyneth, who was in front of Dudian. He didn't continue to pay attention to her. He coldly stared at Dudian. You have stolen the power of the devil. You have made contributions to the temple. I will give you a chance to live. Apologize and leave with me. Dudian narrowed his eyes. Who are you to talk nonsense? The blonde youth's eyes flashed. Don't look for death. Dean's face sank as he looked at him coldly. A lot of people like to talk to me like that, and now they are dead. Saint. Saint. At this time, several voices echoed from the side. Skagen and other masters trotted over. They shouted loudly as they arrived in front of Dudian and Gwyneth. Saint, why didn't you inform us that you had come from the inner wall? We would have come to greet you. Inner wall? Dean's eyes narrowed as he heard the words of Skagen and others. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he gloomily stared at the blonde youth. Many things flashed through his mind. The blonde youth was about to make a move when he saw Skagen and others. He frowned and said in a cold voice, I have arrived yesterday. This person has been bewitched by the devil. I have been ordered to capture him and send him to the monastery to be purified. Skagen and others were stunned. They turned to look at Dudian and then at the blonde youth. Skagen quickly said, Saint, is this a misunderstanding? Dean is a new genius master. He has not only created the new textile machine but also other high-level inventions. Recently he has created the legendary steam gun. He donated it to the military and helped us to win the barbarian war. How can he be related to the devil? The square-face master and several other old men also spoke out in support of Dean. Dean didn't expect Skagen and others to protect him. He was surprised but felt a trace of warmth. He secretly thanked them for their kindness. Chapter 436. The blond youth snorted as he heard the words of Skagen and others. The inner wall already knows about the new legendary item. It's a taboo technique and the power of the devil. A genius has fallen to the point of using the devil's power to earn fame. It's simply arrogant to proclaim the devil's power and blaspheme the grace of God. Skagen and others were startled. Dudian said in a cold voice, "The devil's power? How can you say that my new divine incantation is the power of the devil with just one sentence? What a joke! What evidence do you have? In my opinion, your words are the biggest blasphemy to the God of Light." "Shut up!" the blond youth shouted. His figure suddenly moved, and like a falcon spreading its wings, he pounced on Dean to capture him. Gwyneth's face slightly changed as she pulled out the dagger from her waist. "Get lost." The blond youth didn't show any mercy as he pounced on Gwyneth with his stick. Bang! The stick moved like a gust of wind as it hit Gwyneth's wrist. Under her shocked eyes, the dagger in her hand was knocked out and fell into the crowd. At the same time, he stepped forward and pressed his palm on her shoulder. Bang! Gwyneth's body flew out and fell more than 10 meters away, rolling on the ground. "Come over." The blond youth didn't stop after he sent Gwyneth flying. He raised his hand to grab Dean's shoulder. Dean's eyes flashed with anger. The moment he was about to grab him, he fiercely punched out. Bang! The fist hit the center of his palm, and a tremendous force surged out. The golden-haired young man's expression suddenly changed as he felt the incredible surging force in his palm. He hurriedly shook his wrist, wanting to release the force, but it was too late. A light cracking sound came from his palm joint, and his body that was rushing forward suddenly fell back. He took a few steps back on the high platform, and looked at the black-haired young man in front of him with a face full of shock. Dean retracted his fist and looked at him coldly. "Are you a saint or a bandit? You want to arrest me? Please give me an explanation. We have painstakingly studied the new item, and you want to take us away with just a few words? Ridiculous." His voice was cold, but there was a trace of anger and killing intent in his heart. This matter was beyond his expectations. Suddenly a strong person from the inner wall had come to arrest him. But the most important thing was that he had inexplicably provoked the people from the inner wall. The strength of the saint was obviously higher than that of a senior hunter. He dared to capture the master of the temple in front of so many people. It could be seen that the force behind him was extremely powerful. He didn't care about the Holy Church and the Temple of Element. The blond youth felt a burst of pain in his arm. He secretly endured the pain as he looked at Dean. Sure enough, a dignified master of the temple has such a strong power. "You better come back with me for interrogation and confess the power behind you, otherwise. I followed the will of the God of Light to study the invention. I'm innocent. You don't have any evidence and you want to arrest me? Do you think you can do whatever you want in the outer wall just because you are from the inner wall?" Dudian pulled up the tiger's skin as he added on to the others. Skagen and others didn't expect things to become so stiff. They couldn't help but complain about the blond youth's way of doing things. They would have nothing to say if the blond youth wanted to arrest Dean in secret. But at the moment he wanted to arrest Dean in front of more than half of the temple's architects. It put them in an awkward situation and made them lose their prestige. "Lord Saint, could there be a misunderstanding? You have to give an explanation if you want to arrest Master Dean." Skagen bit the bullet and said. The old man next to him said, "Yes, Master Dean is a legendary master of the temple. You have to say how he colluded with the devil. Otherwise it will be hard to convince the public." Yes. Shouldn't you give an explanation?" The others echoed. They were masters and didn't want to get involved in this mess. But the blond youth's actions had undoubtedly embarrassed all the masters. The blond youth's face turned gloomy as he heard the words of Skagen and others. Although he didn't put the masters in his eyes, but he knew that there would be some trouble if he wanted to arrest Dean in public. If Dean didn't talk about flying and other taboo things, then he wouldn't have made a move midway. He would have waited for Dean to finish talking. Moreover, he wanted to capture Dean as it would save him a lot of time. He would leave the rest of the matter to the temple. He was only responsible for capturing Dean. He didn't expect that the weak architect would have such a strong strength. He was injured because of his carelessness. He is an architect, but he has such a strong strength. Isn't that evidence? The blonde youth said in a gloomy tone. The people who were waiting for the blonde youth to speak were speechless. Saint, Master Dean is not only a master but also a knight of the Knight's Hall. It isn't unusual for him to have such abilities. It has nothing to do with the devil's power. The Knight's Hall can testify to this. Skagen explained. Knight? The blonde youth's face changed. Dean was paying attention to the blonde youth. He saw the subtle changes in the youth's face. He narrowed his eyes. It seemed that his identity as a knight was able to make the blonde youth afraid of him. Could it be inferred that the Knight's Hall also had influence in the inner wall? Yes, Master Dean is an honorary Golden Knight of the Knight's Hall. He helped us repel the barbarians and saved countless civilians. He is a great hero, the old man next to him said. The blonde youth was startled as his face turned ugly. He didn't think that the orders conveyed to him would involve the Knight's Hall. Moreover, it seemed that the reputation of the youth in the outer wall was much higher than he had imagined. The crowd was stunned as they looked at the conversation between Skagen and the others. They didn't dare to interrupt or make any noise. No one would shout in support of Dean. Even a fool could see that the blonde youth who suddenly appeared had a distinguished status. He wasn't someone they could provoke, especially when it came to the devil's matter. The blonde youth was silent, thinking quickly in his heart. Judging from the current situation, taking Dean back by force would obviously cause a backlash from the temple. Although he did not particularly care about this matter, there was a trace of concern in his heart. But the most important thing was that, judging from the fight just now, if Dean stubbornly resisted, he might not be able to arrest him by force. Moreover, the Knight's Hall was involved in this. Chapter 437. No wonder this old man didn't say anything this time and let me take him away so easily. There was a trace of anger in the blonde youth's eyes as he thought about the reaction of the temple lord yesterday. The other side knew that this matter involved a great deal. If he forcibly took away Dudian, then it would inevitably cause dissatisfaction from the Knight's Hall, and the temple would rebound. It would even cause a very bad impact on the outer wall. However, he didn't know what to say to give a reasonable explanation. He was just an executor. He only knew that Dean was arrested in the name of colluding with the devil to violate the divine right. Other things had nothing to do with him, and it was not within the scope of his knowledge. Skagen and others looked at the silent blonde youth. They continued to persuade him. The situation was in a deadlock. After a long silence, the blonde youth slowly said, "Everyone, as God's messengers, have you forgotten the dogma in the Bible? The God of light controls the sun and the sky. This is the domain of God, but this person wants to fly to the sky. This is a violation of God's power, and his sin cannot be redeemed. Does this not prove that he colludes with the devil and has the intention to rebel?" Skagen and others were startled by the words. Dean's eyes narrowed as he heard this, but his heart was a little relieved. He said in a cold voice, "Saint, why are you so sure that flying in the sky is a violation of the divine right, and not a right that the God of light has specifically given to us humans? Could it be that in your heart the God of light is selfish? Your words are the real blasphemy." The blonde youth angrily said, "The sky is the domain of God. How can we humans touch it? Since ancient times no one has been able to set foot in the sky. Only the devil has been trying to violate the divine right. Do you know that your words are the greatest disrespect to the God of light? Dean sneered. The God of light isn't as selfish as the saint thinks. The God of light gave us the right to make inventions. Moreover, I was able to comprehend the mystery of the air faction. All of these were given by the God of light. Why are you saying that he is colluding with the devil? This is slander and disrespect. You. The blond youth was so angry that he clenched the wooden stick. Skagen and others stood in the middle to dissuade them. Skagen looked at the blond youth. Saint, Master Dean is right. If we can create an invention to fly in the sky, then it will be easy to kill the monsters outside the giant wall. Moreover, we can completely eradicate the barbarians outside the fortress. How can the devil do such a good thing? When the blond youth heard this, he was so angry that he rolled his eyes and said, "You old fools, this is all an illusion created by the devil. Once we violate the divine right, let's not talk about whether we can eradicate the barbarians or not. The moment we step into the sky, the gods will be shocked and angry. They will send disaster and punishment. This is not something you can bear." Skagen and the others hesitated when they heard this. The domain of deities cannot be trampled by anyone. This is disturbing the divine authority. If you all continue to persuade him, then you are harboring him. The golden-haired youth continued. The blond youth continued. I don't want anyone to trample on the god's domain. If you continue to persuade me, then you have to show evidence. Dean saw their expressions and suddenly realized how deep their reverence for God was. He considered his words and said, Saint, I don't object if you want to arrest me, but you must show me the evidence. Since the day I stepped into the temple, I've been studying and studying the scriptures. I've created new legendary items by my own efforts. You don't have any evidence, but you say that I'm colluding with the devil. I can't accept it. The blond youth snorted. You are trying to touch the domain of God. That is the biggest evidence. Dean was waiting for these words. He faintly smiled. If mastering the ability to fly represents a violation of the divine right, then I would like to ask the saint whether archers violate the divine right? They have mastered the ability to make arrows fly. Then I would like to ask if we jump from the ground is a violation of the divine right? How many meters should we jump from the ground? If there are no rules, then wouldn't it be too much to say that I have colluded with the devil? The blond youth's face changed. He was about to open his mouth. Dean continued. Moreover, I am an honorary knight of the Knight's Hall. I believe that the saint knows how strict the quality of the Knight's Hall is. If you want to arrest me, then please ask the Knight's Hall to convict me. Of course, before that, I still need the magistrate to carry out an investigation and find evidence of me colluding with the devil. Otherwise, wouldn't it be too chilling for me to be wrongly accused just because of a single sentence from you? How can we study the new items in the future? Who would dare to be an oracle if I accidentally discover some new divine skill and you accuse me of colluding with the devil without any evidence? Skagen, the old man and others nodded as they heard Dean's words. Although they knew that Dean was deliberately inciting them, but they couldn't find any fault in his words. If the saint had evidence, then they would have nothing to say. But to arrest a master without evidence was really bullying. The crowd in the audience heard Dean's words and looked at each other. There was a small disturbance. The blond youth's eyes were filled with anger as he felt the change in the atmosphere. He bitterly looked at Dean. The Knight's Hall, magistrate and even the Holy Church wouldn't stand idly by. Things had become a bit complicated. The most important thing was that he couldn't arrest Dean by force. He could only rely on negotiations. But when did he learn to negotiate? The blond youth looked at Dean. If you haven't colluded with the devil, then why are you afraid to go back with me for investigation? Dean replied. When have I ever been afraid of being investigated? First, you wanted to arrest me in the name of colluding with the devil. I am obviously innocent, so why should I accept the accusation? Second, You said that I will be investigated? In that case, you don't have any evidence in your hands. Since you don't have any evidence, I'm just a suspect in your eyes. Since that's the case, I'm happy to cooperate with the investigation. However, I'm currently in the middle of a lecture. Not only did you suddenly interrupt me, you even injured my attendant and tried to forcefully arrest me. Isn't this how you should treat a suspect? The golden-haired youth was slightly stifled. He suppressed his anger and said, "Since you are willing to cooperate, then leave with me now." Dean saw that the blond youth ignored the other words. He sneered, "You are a saint, but you injured my attendant and tried to arrest me by force. Shouldn't you give me an explanation? Don't tell me that we, who are dedicated to the study of magic, are nothing in your eyes?" The blond youth was so angry that he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "Do you want an explanation?" That attendant came out and got in the way. He was already being merciful by not killing him on the spot. Moreover, his arm was still trembling in pain. He hadn't even asked for an explanation, but the other party actually dared to shamelessly ask for one? What explanation do you want? If you had cooperated, how could your attendant have been injured? The blond youth angrily said, "A trivial attendant dared to offend me. I didn't hold you responsible, but you want me to give you an explanation?" Dudian indifferently said, "My attendants are loyal. Who told you to rush over without reporting your identity? I thought that the Dark Church wanted to assassinate me." The blond youth was too lazy to argue with Dean. "Now that things are clear, you will leave with me and go back for investigation. If you are innocent, then I will naturally send you back." "You should treat people like you are treating people," Dudian said. "First of all, you suspect me. But I haven't seen any evidence of your suspicions. According to the law of the magistrate, when a person is suspected, there must be physical evidence or witness involved in the case. I would like to ask, what is the evidence of your suspicions? If there is no evidence, then you will take me back for investigation and waste my precious time. Isn't that too unreasonable?" "You." The blond youth's eyes flashed with anger. He saw that the boy didn't intend to go back with him. The more he talked, the bigger the advantage the other side had. His weakness had been grasped by the other side, and that was the evidence. He didn't have any evidence in his hands. But the inner wall didn't need evidence to arrest people. However, the person he wanted to capture this time was not someone he could take away with brute force. He could only rely on his glib tongue to get evidence, and this point, he did not have to say, it would only make it more and more far-fetched. The blond youth took a deep breath and restrained his anger. He coldly stared at Dean. "I advise you to obediently go back with me for investigation. Otherwise, when I bring the evidence, it won't be an invitation anymore." "Is this a threat?" Dean chuckled. "I also advise you to arrest people based on evidence. Don't act like a bandit assassin." "Good." The blond youth deeply looked at him. "You will regret it." Finished speaking, he suddenly turned around, tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and dashed along the corridor, disappearing in front of everyone in the blink of an eye. Skagen and others looked at the direction where the blond youth left, and then turned to look at Dean. They couldn't help but smile. What was the matter with this farce? Dean narrowed his eyes as he looked at the back of the blond youth. The smile on his face slowly disappeared. He turned around and looked at Skagen and others. "Thank you, masters, for your help. I'm very grateful. Today's lecture has been interrupted. I'm in no mood to say anything else. I'll take my leave." Skagen and the others comforted him. "Don't think too much. We all believe you. Since this is a misunderstanding, I believe it will be solved." Chapter 438. Everyone, I'm very sorry. Today's lecture is over. Dean looked at the crowd in the square. "I will publish the basic knowledge of the gas faction in the Temple of Exchange. Those who are interested can exchange and read it. In addition, as I said before, I will accept a few students to spread the gas faction. Anyone who is willing can come to the place where I live." Dean slightly bowed. Dean didn't care about the commotion in the audience as he walked down the stage. He came to Gwyneth and saw the blood on her mouth. "Are you still holding on?" "Yes." Gwyneth bowed. Dean nodded and turned away from the corridor. Gwyneth followed him. Edward was startled. He hesitated for a moment but trotted to catch up. After leaving the square, Dean saw that there was no one around. He turned around and picked up Gwyneth's body. "Hurry up!" Gwyneth didn't expect Dean to suddenly pick her up. She instinctively raised her hand to block him. But she couldn't exert any strength in her arms. She whispered, "Master, I can walk. Your ribs are broken and your organs are bleeding. You will get more injured if you continue to walk." Dean said in an indifferent tone, "Are you shy in a life-and-death situation?" Gwyneth was startled. She didn't know how Dean knew that her ribs were injured. She bit her lips but didn't say anything. She let Dean carry her as he ran. Gwyneth felt as if she was walking on flat ground. Her body was extremely stable. She looked at Dean for a moment but soon recovered her eyes. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, Dean reached the foot of the hill. He saw the carriage parked on the roadside. He put Gwyneth on a soft chair. He turned around and saw the figure of his new student trotting on the hillside. Gwyneth was sweating and out of breath. His figure flashed and ran in front of Edward. Without any explanation, he clamped Edward's body and turned around to descend the mountain. Edward could only feel the scenery around him whizzing past him at lightning speed. He was so frightened that his face turned ashen. The strong wind in front of him made it difficult for him to breathe. But in the span of a few breaths, the whistling sound came to an abrupt stop. His vision stabilized, and a large horse appeared in front of him. He was so frightened that he cried out. Dean put him on the ground. "Get in the car." Edward reacted and hurriedly entered the carriage. Dean jumped into the carriage and personally acted as the coachman. He pulled the rope and drove the horse back. Dean picked up Gwyneth as they returned to the castle. He looked at Noyce. "Go to the military and call the best doctor." Noyce, seeing that Gwyneth was not well, jumped up with fright, and hastily pulled a horse from the stable, mounted it, and galloped away with a shout. Dean came to the hall and put Gwyneth on the sofa. He looked at the location of her wound. There was no sign of the injury spreading. He was a little relieved. "You stay here and rest. Don't move." Then he called Crone. "Call everyone to prepare for the meeting." Crone saw that Dean was in a hurry to return. He knew that the situation was not good. He nodded and ran to inform everyone. Dudian saw Edward coming out of the gate and said, "You go to the training ground to play." Edward felt that his teacher was in a bad mood. He didn't dare to touch the bad luck of his teacher. He nodded and turned away. A few minutes later, everyone in the castle gathered in the hall. Dean's eyes swept through the crowd. Something happened today. Sergei and Nicholas saw Gwyneth lying on the sofa. They realized that the situation wasn't right. Sergei couldn't help but ask, "Didn't you go to teach? Was there an assassination attempt on the road?" Dean looked at him but didn't answer. "The people from the inner wall slandered me for colluding with the devil. They want me to go to the inner wall for investigation." "What?" Sergei, Glenn, Dennis, and Mason's complexion greatly changed. They were shocked. Artemis, who was young, was at a loss. Yvette, who was on the other side, had an indifferent face. She didn't learn the language of the wall, so she didn't understand what Dean said. She wasn't interested in it. But her eyelids twitched as she saw the reaction of Sergei and others. Dean quietly looked at everyone. "They don't have evidence, so I have dismissed the matter. But it is only temporary. I think they will come again soon. Maybe I will have to go to the inner wall with them." Sergei, Glenn, and others looked at each other. They didn't expect that their peaceful life would suddenly take such a turn. Dean continued, "This time I have offended the people from the inner wall. They are likely to find a reason to deal with me. You will be implicated in the future if you follow me. So if you want to leave now, then leave. I won't make it difficult for you." Hearing this, everyone exchanged glances with each other. Their gazes flickered and their thoughts were indeterminate. "We believe you," Mason, who was standing next to Sergei, said. "It's too despicable for them to slander good people. Don't say that you didn't collude with the devil. Even if you did collude with the devil, so what? You helped us to repel the barbarians. How can they do this to you?" Dean shook his head. "I don't want to implicate you guys." "I won't go," Mason said. Dean looked at him and nodded slightly. The hall was silent for a moment. Dennis slowly said, "Master, I'm sorry. I don't want to get involved in such a thing." Dean calmly said, "I understand." Dennis hesitated for a moment and said, "If you can survive this disaster and need me in the future, I'm willing to come back. I hope you can forgive me." "No problem," Dean replied. Dennis glanced at the others, sighed, and turned to leave. Glenn looked at his back as he left. She wanted to say something but hesitated. She sighed. "Is there anyone else?" Dean looked at the crowd. "If you don't quit now, then you won't have a chance in the future." Everyone was silent. Dean was relieved as he saw that the crowd didn't speak again. He was prepared for Dennis to leave. After all, they didn't have any friendship. They just relied on the balance of the contract. Dennis didn't have to work for him. "Dean, I'm sorry." A weak voice echoed as Dean was about to open his mouth again. Dean's heart sank as he heard the voice. He looked at the person who spoke. It was Sham. Mason, who was standing next to Sham, was surprised as he saw Sham's hesitation. He angrily said, "Sham, what do you want to say? Are you going to leave too?" Sham was roared by him. His body trembled and slightly bowed his head. "Sham, you can't do this." Zack hurriedly persuaded him. Dean deeply looked at Sham. He never thought that the second person to choose to leave would be one of the three of them. He wouldn't be surprised if Nicholas or Sergei left. But Sham was a person he had experienced life and death with since childhood. He was also the one he trusted the most. Disappointed? Heartache? Dean looked at Sham, who bowed his head. He suddenly understood that time could change everything. It could heal the pain and hatred. It could also heal the great love and friendship that was sung about in poems. But if all of these could be healed, then what was the meaning of immortality? Chapter 439. Crone wanted to say something but hesitated. He finally bowed his head and went upstairs. "Dean," Macon hurriedly said, "Sham is just confused for a moment. I won't let him go." After saying that, he turned around and grabbed Sham's collar as he angrily roared, "You bastard! Did you forget who saved you in the desert during the scavenger trial? Who helped you when you were in danger? Don't forget that you still owe us your life. Otherwise you will be more than a cripple." Zack stretched out his hand to stop the impulsive Macon, but hesitated and stopped. "You actually left at this time. Are you worthy of Dean? Are you worthy of us?" Macon grabbed Sham's collar. His voice was full of anger as it echoed in the silent hall. Dean slightly frowned and was about to speak to stop him. Suddenly, a low laugh sounded from Sham's mouth. Macon was stunned. Sham pushed away Dean's hand and broke free from Macon's hand. But he used too much force and lost his balance. He fell to the ground. His face was in close contact with the ground. He slowly climbed up with the help of crutches. No one could see his expression. He whispered and said, "Yes, if it wasn't for you and Zack, I would have been poisoned to death. If it wasn't for Dean, I would have died." He slowly raised his head. His face was already covered in tears, but he still smiled and said, "But I would rather die back then than become a cripple." Macon was startled for a long time. He suddenly pulled Sham's collar and growled, "What are you talking about? What's wrong with being a cripple? Don't you still have a life? Are you blaming me and Zack for being nosy?" Sham silently hung his head. After a moment, he turned to Dean's direction and whispered, "Dean, I'm sorry. I owe you. I can't repay you in this life. I don't want to get involved in the struggle. I just want to live a stable life." Dean deeply looked at him. He slightly raised his hand to stop Macon from continuing to speak. He slowly said, "Everyone has their own ambitions. We used to be brothers. I don't blame you if you want to quit. I wish you a happy life in the future." Sham lowered his head and clenched his fists tightly. Tears slipped from his cheeks to his chin and fell to the floor. His shoulders slightly twitched. He took a deep breath and bowed deeply to Dean. He ignored Crone, who just came down the stairs and handed him gold coins. He turned and walked out of the hall. Mason and Zack were stunned in the same place, looking at his back disappearing little by little outside the door. Their eyes were red and somewhat moist. They knew that this time, their many years of brotherhood will be completely cut off. They supported each other during the special training. They helped each other during the trial. They lived and died together. The blood and the passion were still vivid in their minds. Dean silently retracted his eyes and looked at the others present. "Is there anyone else who wants to leave?" Nicholas secretly glanced at Dean. When he touched the corner of Dean's eyes, he felt that Dean was glancing at him. He quickly retracted his eyes and bowed his head. "It's not too late to leave now," Dudian continued. There was still silence in the hall. There was no echo. Dean turned to look at Nicholas and Sergei. "Are you two going to stay and die?" Sergei shrugged his shoulders. "I have no place to go anyway. My old life was bailed out by you. I swear to follow you," Nicholas said in a well-behaved manner. His words were much more beautiful than Sergei's. However, he secretly cursed in his heart. If they left, then they would be killed on the spot in the blink of an eye. He knew that Dean allowed Dennis to leave, because Dennis hadn't been in the castle for a long time and didn't know much. As for the other kid, he was Dean's childhood companion and didn't touch any secrets. But they were different. After they were bailed out of Thornflower Prison, they followed Dean and participated in many things. If they left at this moment, then they would be killed because of their understanding of Dean's character. Dean looked at Nicholas, the old fox. "In that case, we are on the same boat. I hope you have the determination to die." Glenn sighed and said, "If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have agreed to your invitation. But now that I have agreed, I will help you. Just tell me what you want to do. We hunters have long been accustomed to life and death, so it's not a big deal. Besides, the battle hasn't even started yet, so it's not certain who will die." There was a smile on Dean's face. "Yes, it's not certain who will die." Nicholas carefully asked, "Master, do you have a plan?" Dean pondered for a moment. "This time they came to arrest me, but I blocked them. Next time they will send more people to arrest me. So I can only follow them and go to the inner wall. They won't dare to hurt me because of my identity as a master, and I'm a Golden Knight of the Knight's Hall." Mason asked, "What if they are unreasonable?" Dean looked at him. "This is what I'm worried about. So I need your support. If I don't come back, then you will follow my plan. Gather your strength and prepare to attack the giant wall. If necessary, destroy the entire giant wall." "Destroy the giant wall?" Everyone was shocked. Dean nodded. "There are more masters in the inner wall than you can imagine. They can easily kill senior hunters like you. So if you want to attack the inner wall, you can't rely on your own strength. You can only besiege Wei to rescue the besieged." "Besiege Wei to rescue the besieged?" Everyone was puzzled as they heard the strange words. "In short, they will use other things to pin down the main forces of the inner wall and then rescue me." Dean continued, "Of course, this is the worst-case scenario. If they investigate and prove that I'm not colluding with the devil, then they will release me." Glenn nodded. "You have a distinguished identity. They won't hurt you if they don't have conclusive evidence. But it's better to be prepared just in case." "Yes. Young master, how do we know that you're safe and sound inside?" What if you are safe inside and we attack? Wouldn't that harm you? Nicholas asked. Chapter 440. Sneak into the inner wall? Everyone was shocked as they looked at each other. The high wall of the inner wall had been isolated from the outer wall for more than 200 years. Countless nobles wanted to climb over the wall but were blocked. But Dean had a way to sneak into the inner wall? This was something that nobles didn't even dare to think about. Dean didn't elaborate but looked at Crone. "Give me a pen and paper." Crone handed over the pen and paper. Dudian quickly wrote on the table. After a moment, a large number of words appeared on the snow-white paper. He waved to Nicholas. "Go and collect some plants. Hire some fields to cultivate them. Remember to do it secretly. Don't leak any information. Otherwise, even if I don't want your life, the magistrate and the Holy Church won't spare you." Nicholas took the paper, but his fingers trembled as he heard Dudien's words. Young master, what kind of plants are these?" "Ordinary plants," Dean indifferently said, "but they will become unusual in the future." Nicotine was startled as he looked down. He saw familiar names of the plants. "Mulberry leaf? Isn't this ordinary weed? Why are you planting it?" "These are treasures." Dean inserted the quill into the pen holder. "You are fully responsible for this matter. Hire your own people and take care of the relationship. You will take the main responsibility if there are any problems. I will ask Noyce to assist you in managing the plant. I don't need to teach you how to manage the people and the industry." Weeds are treasures? Nicotine was at a loss, but he realized that there was a lot of knowledge in it as he looked at Dean's serious expression. He knew that Dean had arranged Noyce to assist him in order to monitor him. Dean trusted Noyce more than Nicotine. It showed that the task Noyce was responsible for wasn't as simple as planting plants. It was estimated to be an extremely dangerous task. Dean told Nicotine to go to the study room to discuss the details. The task he gave to Nicotine was the most important part of his plan. Mulberry leaf was the name of this world. But in the old era it had a resounding name. Marijuana. That's right, it was marijuana. In his plan, he wanted the people of the outer wall to help him attack the inner wall. But he didn't have enough power to incite them. As for money? Wealth could make people crazy, but he didn't have the wealth to buy the entire outer wall. After all, the forces that had been around for decades were intricate and complex. They were bound to encounter a lot of obstacles if they wanted to rise suddenly. However, drugs were different. They were as scary as a virus. Moreover, the speed at which poison spreads and ferments are extremely shocking. It can cover an extremely wide area in an extremely short period of time. Most importantly, the people enslaved by drugs were far more reliable and crazy than wealth, power, faith, and so on. Any drug addict would be unable to resist the temptation of addiction, and this was worth giving up everything, including their families and even their own lives. Dean was glad that the previous disaster had destroyed the city and the biosphere. But almost all the harmless plants had been preserved. Although some plants had changed due to radiation, viruses, and other unknown factors, they had turned into demonic plants and were more threatening than monsters. But most of the plants had retained their original appearance. The mulberry leaf was only one of the ingredients he had provided. There were other addictive plant ingredients that were no less harmful than the mulberry leaf. "Sergei, you are responsible for teaching Gabriel and Artemis. Macon and Zach are also responsible for fighting," Dean continued. "At the same time, recruit talents and set up a mercenary knight regiment. I will officially incorporate you as my squire. As a squire of a Golden Knight, you have the legal right to recruit your own squire and set up a knight regiment." Knight Group was an exclusive combat team that was conferred by the Knights Hall. The number of people in the group was determined according to the knight's rank. Mercenary Group was similar to the Adventurer Team in slums and residential areas. But Adventurer Team was regarded as a civilian group. Their spirit of contract was low and they were not legal. Mercenary group was different. They belonged to a formal team. The contracts signed would be recorded in the magistrate's files. Retinue. Sergei didn't expect the surprise to come so suddenly. As a retainer of a Golden Knight, his status was naturally much higher than a hunter. Even though he was a senior hunter, but in the end he was still a shady existence. He was limited by the consortium, so he could only enjoy a small part of the privileges of the consortium. But a retainer of a Golden Knight was different. Especially a retainer of a Golden Knight. In the eyes of the nobles, once promoted by their own knight, they would quickly turn from a retainer to a regular knight. Glenn enviously looked at Sergei. "Master, can I also be your retinue?" Dean looked at her and nodded. No problem. He would let her go to the inner wall to pass the message to him. She would have the identity of a retainer as a cover. Sergei calmed down as he saw Dean agree with Glenn so easily. He asked, "Master, is the mercenary knights set up to support you? What is the name of the knight group? How many talents should we recruit?" "You are responsible for this. Gwyneth and Glenn will join the group. You will be the captain for the time being and assist Sergei. But your main responsibility is to pass the news that I'm in the inner wall. If Sergei wants to act arbitrarily, then I'll give you a letter, and you have the right to cancel his order." Dudian continued, "Although the mercenary knights are under my banner, but from now on you will be the deputy head. Gwyneth and Glenn will join the group." Glenn was stunned for a moment, then happily said, "Yes." Sergei said with a bitter face, "Young master, with you here, how can I dare to act arbitrarily? You think too highly of me. You have to guard against people's ambitions," Dean indifferently said. Sergei's mouth twitched as he shook his head. Dean waved to Gabriel and Artemis. Both of them came to him. Gabriel looked at Dean nervously. There was a trace of fear in his eyes. Although the boy had learned to hide his thoughts, but under Dean's experienced eyes, he was still able to see through it. He stroked Artemis's little head and said to Gabriel, "Do you know why I brought you back?" Gabriel was startled. "I don't know." "Because you are orphans," Dudian slowly said. "If you had stayed in that town, then you would have become food in the belly of barbarians or even a pile of feces." Gabriel's face turned pale as he clenched his fist. He had been learning how to read and write in the castle. He had asked Crone and the others about the situation outside the Golden Wall. He knew that Dean wasn't lying. Because of this, he was able to endure Dean's harsh requirements for him to practice swordsmanship because he was grateful. However, he felt a bit of fear every time he saw the boy who brought him back. It was as if he was facing a natural enemy. "I asked Sergei to teach you how to practice swordsmanship and read books. You have to study hard." Dean patted Gabriel's shoulder. "Although I saved you once, but if you follow me in the future it will be more dangerous. If you don't work hard and aren't strong enough, then you will repeat the same mistakes again. No one can save you and you can't save your sister. Do you understand?" Gabriel bit her lips and said, "Young master, I know." Chapter 441. Guests. Crone was startled but quickly left the hall. Dudian looked at Sergei and others. "You guys go and prepare yourselves. In addition, the members of the Knights don't need to be examined in terms of quality. As long as they are strong enough and you can discipline them." "I know." Sergei nodded. Everyone left. Dudian turned to look outside the hall. A group of people came over under the leadership of Crone. Dudian didn't move as he didn't need to greet many people with his current status. Soon, these people came to the living room. Most of them were dressed luxuriously, with jade, agate, and other luxurious accessories on their necks or fingers. In their eyes, this was not just showing off, but a symbol of status and politeness. They were all nobles, and among them, there were a few figures dressed in the attire of oracles. Dudian knew the intention of the visitors. He waved to Crone. Pick out 9 people from the list of people who gave away parasitic soul worms. Add them to my list of students and hand them over to the temple. Let the rest go back. By the way, the people who gave away rare parasitic soul worms and rare parasitic soul worms must be included in the list. I know, Master. Crone respectfully retreated as he saw that Dudian didn't have any other orders. Dudian rubbed his head as he felt tired. He gently rubbed his fingers and pondered for a moment. He picked up the pen and wrote another letter. It didn't take long for Noyce to return with a carriage with the military flag. There were 2 military doctors in the carriage. They quickly came to the hall. Greetings, Master Dean. Both of them respectfully saluted as they saw Dudian. Dudian didn't have the mood to chat. He asked them to hurry up and treat Gwyneth. Noyce, go to the Knight's Hall and give this letter to them, Dean said to Noyce, who didn't stop his horse. Noyce nodded as he picked up the letter and left. After a moment, the 2 doctors finished treating Gwyneth's wound. They wrapped a layer of gauze and said goodbye to Dudian. Are you feeling better? Dudian looked at Gwyneth, who was sitting on the sofa. Gwyneth's face was pale as she whispered, Thank you, Master. I'm much better. I'll take you and Glenn to the inner wall when it's dark. Take a good rest. Dean handed her a small bottle. This is the healing ointment from the temple. The effect is good. Apply it first. Gwyneth glanced at it, took it, thanked him, and went upstairs. Dean looked at Gwyneth's back as she went upstairs. He suddenly thought that if he went to the inner wall for inspection, then he would have to eat and drink a lot of food. The black snow season hadn't passed yet, so he had to eat high-calorie food to maintain his body temperature. He might not get the same treatment in the inner wall. Dean called Crone. Go and hire a chef. Remember to pick randomly. Don't let anyone find out. Also buy a month's worth of ingredients from my menu. Let the chef dry them and turn them into dried food and bacon. It doesn't matter if the taste is bad as long as it can be preserved for a long time. Crone understood, quickly agreed, and turned to leave. There are still too few people. Joseph and Barton have gone to the Holy Church and the military. Now it's almost time to participate in the interview. Dean's eyes flashed as his fingers subconsciously rubbed as he thought. It was noon in the blink of an eye. Noyce rushed back to the castle and looked at Dudian. Master, the Knight's Hall asked me to bring you a letter. Dean, who had just finished his lunch, quickly read the letter. His tense heart was relieved. Sure enough, the Knight's Hall was reliable. According to the letter, their people in the inner wall would intervene in the review process to ensure the fairness of the review in order to preserve Dean's innocence. It seems that the monastery in the inner wall is inextricably linked with the Holy Church. The saints of the monastery dared to directly go to the temple to arrest a master-level saint. Such behavior is undoubtedly a slap to the face of the Holy Church. But the Holy Church didn't say anything. Instead, the Knight's Hall came forward. Dudian's eyes lit up. There were only 2 possible reasons for this. First, the power of the monastery in the inner wall was far stronger than the Holy Church. Secondly, the Radiant Monastery and the Radiant Church were one and the same, and had a subordinate relationship. Otherwise, if they were offended by other forces that were not too different from them, anyone would fall out with them. Thinking of this, Dean's eyes were filled with anger. Judging from various factors and names, he was inclined to the second possibility. In the end, the first one to stand up and mess with him was actually the force he relied on. Light Church, what a light church! Dudian narrowed his eyes as he thought of the Dark Church. If there was an organization similar to the Dark Church in the inner wall, then wouldn't he be able to take advantage of it? However, he didn't know anything about the situation in the inner wall. He only knew that there was an organization of the Dragon Clan and the monastery. He remembered the Dragon Girl's promise to him. If he went to the inner wall, then he could rely on the Dragon Clan. However, the Dragon Clan may not be willing to protect a newcomer and offend the monastery unless he exposed his divinized splitter magic mark. But who knows if there would be a way to transplant other people's magic marks to the inner wall. If there was such a method and he exposed his secret, he would be sending food to the Dragon Clan instead. Time passed. Dudian spent the whole afternoon thinking about the follow-up plan. At the same time, all the forces from the outside world got the news and sent condolence letters. Dudian didn't have time to read the letters. But when Crone was about to throw them into the garbage bin, he had an idea. He ordered Crone to sort out the letters. If you don't have enough money or you need connections, then you can choose from these letters and ask them for help. If anyone doesn't agree, then tell them that I'll pull them down if something happens to me. These letters are the best evidence. Hearing this, Crone was stunned for a long time. He stammered, "Young master, if you come out in the future, who would dare to get close to us?" Dudian replied, "As long as I'm able to produce a new invention, then they will come. Moreover, didn't you see the number of condolence letters? If it wasn't an accident in the inner wall, but I was injured or some other trivial matter, then the number of condolence letters would explode the mailbox. There are people who are bold enough to send charcoal in snowy weather. Let me remember them. It's a good time to make use of them." Crone was dumbfounded as he listened to Dudian's words. How could he turn around and use them? If you really want to help, then he will help. If you don't want to help, then he will send a letter of condolence. Remember this. Dudian waved his hand. "Go and do your work." The corner of Crone's mouth twitched slightly. He smiled bitterly and turned to leave. The sky was getting dark. Dudian went upstairs to see Gwyneth after dinner. "Are you feeling better?" "Much better." Gwyneth got up from the bed and wanted to get down. Dudian said, "Let's take a break and we will leave in half an hour." Gwyneth nodded. She lifted the quilt and got out of bed after Dudian left the room. In the hall, Dean looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost 8 o'clock. In the area where he lived, there was a curfew at 8 o'clock. Only in some prosperous areas where the nobles and the rich were concentrated, the curfew time was 9 o'clock. The treatment of the rich and the poor was always highlighted. "If someone comes to visit, then tell them that I'm resting," Dudian said to Crone. Chapter 442. "I know, young master." Crone was worried. "Will it be dangerous for you to sneak into the inner wall?" "I'll be careful." Dean smiled and looked at Gwyneth and Glenn. "Are you ready?" "Everything is ready," Glenn said in a serious tone. Dudian nodded and went into the carriage. Gwyneth and Glenn followed him. Noyce jumped in front of the carriage and acted as the coachman. They drove the carriage away from the castle and gradually disappeared into the night. The carriage went into a remote wilderness under Dean's command. Dean asked the two girls to get off the carriage. They saw a figure standing in front of the woods. It was Sergei, who had been waiting for them for a long time. "Master, the horses are ready." Dudian nodded, got on the horse and rode away. Glenn and Gwyneth, each riding a black horse, followed closely behind. After galloping to a remote place in the suburbs, Dean abandoned the horse and walked through the hills and woods with the two girls. It didn't take long for the outline of the giant wall to appear in his line of sight. He glanced at it and sped up. Soon they arrived at the bottom of the giant wall. "Give me the rope," Dudian said to Glenn. Glenn quietly swept over like a ghost shadow. She untied her backpack and took out a bundle of rope from inside. Dean took a deep breath and unzipped the back of his armor. Transparent and thin wings stretched out. Each thin wing was like transparent skin, extremely soft, but after stretching, it was like a sharp blade, exuding cold air. Glenn and Gwyneth's pupils shrank as they saw the wings on Dean's back. They finally knew why Dean was able to sneak into the inner wall. It was too easy for him to climb the giant wall if he had wings that were evolved from magic marks. "Wait for me here." Dean grabbed the rope and ran to the top of the giant wall. He used the power of his wings to climb the steep wall as if it was flat ground. Since he had become a senior hunter, he felt that his wings were more powerful than before. In the blink of an eye he reached the top of the giant wall, which was thousands of meters high. Dean untied the rope and threw it down after he landed. Gwyneth and Glenn were still in shock. They didn't wake up until the rope fell down like a snake. They looked at each other and pulled the rope. They saw that Dudien's end was tied firmly. Then they carefully climbed up the rope. They didn't dare to be as fearless as Dean, especially after climbing to a height of 200 or 300 meters. Their hearts were hanging high, for fear that the rope would break or the other end would loosen. If they fell from this height, even if they didn't die, they would be seriously injured and disabled. A moment later, the two of them climbed up the giant wall using the rope. After landing, they were still in a state of shock. However, they were soon shocked by the scene in front of them. The spacious giant wall and the sky above their heads made them feel like they were in a dream. The majestic giant wall was a sacred symbol in their hearts. They never thought that they would be able to climb it one day. Dean put away the rope. You will have to rely on this rope in the future. Remember to change the route frequently so that no one can track you. He threw the rope on the ground and ran towards the inner wall. Gwyneth and Glenn followed him. They looked down the wall from time to time as they ran. There was an indescribable feeling of shock and excitement as they looked at the scenery of the nearby area. After half an hour of full speed, Dean once again came to the inner wall. He was about to pass directly, but suddenly his eyes narrowed and his face slightly changed. He saw that there were some figures moving on the high wall. He quickly squatted down. Glenn and Gwyneth were scared and quickly squatted down. There is someone. Dean made a gesture and secretly looked up. He saw that on the wide high wall there were two figures moving every few hundred meters. They seemed to be patrolling. Gwyneth and Glenn didn't dare to make a sound as they saw Dean's gesture. There was a trace of tension in their eyes. Although they had experienced life and death, but this time they were sneaking into the noble inner wall. Their pressure had doubled. Strange. There was no one on the wall the last time I came here. How come there are people on duty today? Did I expose something last time? Did the inner wall specially send people to increase the defense line? Dean frowned as he was puzzled. Suddenly he thought of a key point. The last time he came here it was at dawn. But now it was the curfew time. Perhaps, at dawn, the people on the high wall would retreat. Dean waved to the two of them. He applied plant stone powder to eliminate the smell and continued to move forward. Dean could see more and more clearly as he got closer. The people on the wall were wearing uniforms and carrying weapons. Their body heat was almost the same as senior hunters, although their body heat was slightly inferior to Gwyneth and Glenn's, but the gap was not big. In addition, when he passed by the high wall, he suddenly saw some steel ladders nailed to the wall behind the high wall. Rather than saying they were steel ladders, they looked more like steel hoop. There was one nailed every 10 meters, making it difficult for ordinary civilians to climb up. It seems that they didn't send people because of my appearance last time. The edge of the ladder is embroidered. So every night the inner wall will send people to patrol the high wall? It seems that I'm not the only one in the outer wall. There are other forces that want to sneak into the inner wall. But it would be difficult to do so under the watchful eyes of so many senior hunters. Dean was relieved. He asked Glenn and Gwyneth to sneak away from the wall. They passed by the giant wall. The people on the wall didn't notice them. Most of them didn't think that someone could climb the giant wall, which was thousands of meters high. The three of them had officially stepped into the territory of the inner wall after passing through the high wall. Glenn couldn't restrain the excitement on her face as she saw the scenery of the inner wall. Gwyneth was much calmer. Wait! Dean made a gesture. He sniffed the floor and smelled the smell of plants mixed with soil. In addition, there was also the smell of perfume. He looked carefully and his face suddenly changed. He whispered, "There are people patrolling on the giant wall. We have to go down quickly." Glenn and Gwyneth were surprised. They didn't expect that other people from the inner wall could climb the giant wall, which was thousands of meters high. Did they have special abilities? Dean asked Glenn for another set of ropes. He threw it from the wall and looked around. There were no red dots. Only a few 100 meters away, there were a few long red spots in the grass. Most of them were hiding beasts. Go down. Glenn and Gwyneth quickly slid down the rope. Dean took the rope and jumped down. Dean spread his wings to slow down when he was 200 or 300 meters away from the ground. Squat down, Dean said to both of them in a hurry. They quickly squatted down. Dean looked at Glenn. Dig a hole. Glenn didn't say anything as she pressed her hands on the ground. If one looked carefully, they would find that there was a limb next to her little fingers that looked like an underdeveloped finger. This limb was curved like a sharp bone spur. As she dug the soil, this curved sharp blade quickly and easily pushed away the hard stones and other objects in the soil. In just half a minute, Glenn had dug a half-meter deep hole. Chapter 443. Dean and Gwyneth curled up into a ball and squatted in a small pit. Glenn stretched out her hand and poked the soil. She wanted to create a small passage for Dean so that he could observe the outside and breathe at the same time. Dean felt the movement and quickly grabbed her hand. At the same time, he controlled his heartbeat to beat at a very low frequency. His breathing was completely controlled. He was like a stone sculpture. Glenn and Gwyneth were shocked as they felt Dean's abnormality. Both of them weren't rookies, so they immediately followed suit. They squatted in the soil and didn't move. It was as if they were one with the soil. Dean's head was up and his eyes were closed to prevent the sand from falling into his eye socket. Although his eyes were closed, but he could still see everything outside. This was a method that he had mastered after advancing to senior hunter. It was to close his eyes to see through things. His eyelids couldn't block his observation. He saw a faint red light like a firefly floating in the distance. The speed was not fast. As the distance got closer, the intensity of the red light became brighter and brighter. When it came to the giant wall about 2 or 3 kilometers in front of him, Dean felt like a huge human lantern was coming. The whole body was blazing hot, like a burning man. Dean was shocked. His brain quickly diluted his emotions so as not to cause any changes in his body. He instinctively felt like he was being stared at by a beast. He had never seen such exuberant physical heat before. Glenn and Gwyneth's heat was like a firefly compared to the starlight. This heat was much stronger than his own. Although heat couldn't absolutely represent the physique, but in most cases it wouldn't be wrong to judge based on heat. Only a few of them were related to magic marks. The exuberant figure came to the top of the giant wall next to Dean and the others. It seemed that it was looking around. After a few minutes, it went straight to the inner wall. After more than 10 minutes, the figure returned along the direction of the inner wall. Its speed wasn't fast. It seemed that it was taking a casual stroll. The figure didn't stop after passing over the heads of Dean and Gwyneth. It went further and further in Dean's line of sight until the figure was like a tiny spark. It was faintly extinguished by the black tide. Dean was about to sigh in relief when he saw the weak heat figure stop. It didn't go far nor return. Was it resting in the same place? Dean wanted to slightly replace the oxygen in his lungs. Suddenly his eyelids twitched as he thought of a possibility. His pores shrank as he sealed his breath. 7 or 8 minutes passed. The weak heat figure suddenly moved like a falling meteorite. It rapidly expanded towards the direction of Dean and others at an astonishing speed. Dean's heart jumped. Whoosh! The figure came to the top of Dean and the others. It didn't stop for hundreds of meters before it stopped. It looked around the giant wall for a moment, but found nothing. It paused for a moment, and then slowly returned along the original road until the figure completely disappeared from Dean's sight. Even the slightest heat couldn't be seen. Dean's dizzy brain relaxed as he saw this. He drilled out of the soil and gasped for fresh air. He looked at Gwyneth and Glen. Gwyneth, you know the inner wall better than us. You lead the way. Glen, you return the pit back to its original state. Glen asked keenly while filling in the soil, did someone just pass over our heads? I felt a terrible panic. Dean nodded. It was a very strong person. He was stronger than all of us combined. He should be far stronger than a senior hunter. He looked at Gwyneth. You are a disciplinary officer in the inner wall. Do you know what is above a senior hunter? Gwyneth looked at him and whispered, I have been studying in the Disciplinary Institute, so I don't know much about them. I heard that they are called limitless beings. They are very strong. They are as terrible as our keeper of order. They are all monsters. Limitless? Dean and Glen's eyes narrowed as they secretly remembered the name. Come with me, Gwyneth said as she led the way. Dean and Glen immediately followed her. There is something in the grass about 200 meters in the direction of 3:00. It should be a beast. I smell blood. Glen whispered. I can feel it. Gwyneth whispered. It's not a beast but a monster. The inner wall is different from the outer wall. Although it occupies 80% of the area of the giant wall, but the total population is only half of the outer wall. 70% of the area is wilderness. There are many monsters. The nobles of the inner wall live in the central area and never go out. Monsters? Glen was surprised. Dean was startled as he heard Gwyneth's words. In his impression, the inner wall occupied most of the soil and quality resources. It should be 100 times more prosperous than the outer wall. The history of the aristocratic families in the outer wall was on the surface. Their ancestors were from the inner wall but were later expelled for some reason. It made him subconsciously think that the inner wall was overcrowded and the expelled aristocrats were the ones who were eliminated. He didn't expect the opposite to happen. The population of the inner wall wasn't full. On the contrary, it was extremely scarce. The vast soil was abandoned. There were no civilians to plant and cultivate. It was no wonder that all he saw around him was wilderness. The monastery is a very strong force in the inner wall. It is equivalent to the Holy Church in the outer wall. Gwyneth whispered, besides the magistrate, there are also aristocratic forces and the devil's army of the ruler of the giant wall. There are also the devil families. The Disciplinary Institute that I mentioned before is another institution under the magistrate. It is the place where we train our disciplinary officers. There was a trace of gratification in Dean's eyes as he saw that Gwyneth didn't respond to his request. Gwyneth's identity as a member of the inner wall was important to him when he bailed her out. He knew that once he could tame Gwyneth, then he would be able to understand the general face of the inner wall through her. When one knew nothing, it was also the time when one's heart was filled with fear. It was only a matter of time before he would set foot in the inner wall. Gwyneth was an intelligence agent that he had prepared in advance. After the appearance of the saint today, he wanted to ask Gwyneth, but he held back because he could see that although this girl followed him, she didn't really surrender to him. In such a dangerous situation, she didn't take the initiative to help him, so it was useless to force her. Even if he used force, it would be futile. Instead, it would backfire. After all, Gwyneth's body was pierced with steel nails. She was in pain every night. She had suffered inhuman torture in Thornflower Prison. Thornflower Prison had spent a few years to tame her. Her bones were hard and her temper was stubborn. He was glad that he didn't use hard means but soft means. Gwyneth was willing to take the initiative to talk to him. Although he wasn't clear whether she had surrendered to him, but at least he knew that she didn't have a strong aversion to him. So the inner wall is controlled by 5 major forces? Dean asked in a low voice. Gwyneth nodded, yes. Although there are 5 major forces on the surface, but there are factional frictions in each force. The aristocratic forces can be subdivided into many pieces. I understand. Dean had some experience in politics after the tempering of the outer wall, Is there no dark church in the inner wall? Gwyneth didn't even turn her head. Her tone was a bit indifferent. No, but there is something more abominable than the dark church. In other words, the evil here is 100 times more abominable than the evil of the dark church that you know. He had made up more than a dozen chapters in March, and there were still more than 20 chapters left. He had said that he would finish by April at the latest. This month he had to make up 45 chapters. He would start from tomorrow. Chapter 444. Dean felt a trace of hatred in her tone. He thought of the things that happened when she was in prison, and became silent. Whoosh! Gwyneth led the way in front of them. They avoided most of the monsters that were hiding in the bushes. After more than 2 hours, they had covered a very long distance. It was equivalent to crossing the distance from the fortress to the inner wall. Even so, they were still surrounded by endless wastelands and rolling mountains. There were also lush forests and deep dark lakes. Stone Magic Valley. Gwyneth's eyes lit up as she looked at a steep cliff. Found it! This is the Stone Magic Valley. The central area of the inner wall is in front of us. The monastery is also there. We can't continue forward as there are limitless people guarding there. They have all kinds of magic marks and abilities. It would be difficult for us to sneak in with our hiding method. Dean followed her gaze and saw a vague outline of a rock on the cliff. It seemed to be naturally mixed, but the outline looked like a Buddha. Its eyebrows were stained with moss, which made it look somewhat ferocious. Dean was startled as he didn't expect to see a Buddha statue here. Buddhism had never appeared in the giant wall. It should have been replaced by the Holy Church. Most of the statues were left from the old era. He looked at Gwyneth. How can we determine the location of the message if we can't go to the central area? I'm sorry, Master. Gwyneth bowed her head. We can only contact from here. We will be exposed if we continue to move forward. The limitless monsters are guarding the central area. Not to mention us, even mature rare monsters would find it difficult to sneak in. Of course, if there were mature rare monsters in the inner wall, then they would have been killed long ago. Dean frowned. All right, I'll find a way to pass the message here. You just need to accept it. We'll talk about the specific method later. Both women nodded. Take us around and familiarize us with the surrounding terrain, Dean said. Tonight's task had been completed. Gwyneth had told them about the method to sneak into the inner wall. Gwyneth had also told them about the location of the inner wall. Gwyneth nodded. She took Dean and Glenn to wander around in the vicinity. They turned back when the sky was getting dark. Along the way, Glenn sprinkled lime powder from time to time, and sometimes replaced it with sulfur powder. Dudian knew that her black weaver magic marks gave her a perception of the smell of rock. It was a special kind of olfactory perception, specifically for ores and soil. Dean smelled a rotten smell mixed with a fishy smell as they passed by a lake. His pupils shrank as he pulled Gwyneth and Glenn. He looked towards the direction where the smell came from and saw a strange scene. He saw a row of humanoid figures standing in the middle of the forest through the leaves of the forest. Based on the thermal vision he was already familiar with, even though he could only see heat, he instantly knew that there was a group of people standing in the forest. There were more than 100 people in the queue. Dean's pupils shrank. How could there be hundreds of people standing in the middle of the forest in the middle of the night? Could it be that they had tracked their scent and came here to ambush them? The next moment Dean's face changed. His whole body was covered with goosebumps. He saw that in the lake in front of the team, a huge red ball suddenly gushed out. The red heat burned the whole lake into a sea of fire. The surging heat was frighteningly strong, more than 10 times stronger than the figure on the giant wall he had seen before. The most important thing was that the shape of the heat ball was extremely huge. It was like a ball with a diameter of at least 40 to 50 meters. What kind of creature was this? The biggest monster Dean had seen was the Splitter, but it was only a circle bigger than the thing in the lake. Was it another legendary monster? Moo! A low roar came from the lake. It sounded like a cow, but also like a thunder. The next moment, Dean saw the hundreds of people in the forest rush towards the lake. Ambush monster? The next second, Dean overturned this idea. The team of 100 people rushed into the lake and merged with the huge red heat creature. Judging from their movements before they disappeared, all of them directly jumped over. How could they jump directly into the lake in the face of such a giant monster? Wasn't that courting death? Sending food? An electric light flashed in Dean's mind, and he was stunned in place. He looked up and saw Gwyneth anxiously looking at him. Gwyneth gestured to the other side. It meant that they should leave immediately. Gwyneth took the lead and stealthily sneaked away. When Glenn heard the strange roar, she felt a trace of palpitation in her heart and followed closely behind. Dean didn't dare to neglect and quietly followed. In the blink of an eye, they were 4 or 5 miles away from the lake. What is that thing? There was a lingering fear in Dean's heart. Such a huge creature gave him a sense of oppression. Gwyneth's face turned ugly. I'm not sure, but if I'm not mistaken, we should have entered a monster research area by mistake. This area is the Monster Research Institute's territory. We must leave immediately. Monster Research Institute? Dean was startled. What kind of force is it? I'm not sure. I've heard that it has something to do with the monastery and the nobility. Some people say that it is under the direct command of Aristotle. Gwyneth gently gasped. In short, it is a force that can't be provoked. They are a group of devils and perverts. They specialize in the research of monsters. The monsters in the wilderness of the inner wall have escaped from their research area. His Majesty Aristotle? Is he the ruler of our giant wall? Dean's face slightly changed as he thought of something. The monster atlas of the outer wall has always been provided by the inner wall. Is it the Monster Research Institute? Yes. Gwyneth gasped and nodded. Everything related to monsters was made and produced by them, including the armor and weapons of the first hunters. Even the disgusting life weapon was made by them. They can do anything, and they dare to do anything. There was once a person who came to the Monster Research Institute for help, wanting to cure his sister, and the Monster Research Institute agreed. Chapter 445. Dean finally knew the reason why the team of 100 people had lined up by the lake. Those people lined up in the woods were waiting for the appearance of the monster in the lake. Then they would throw themselves into the bait. Dean's eyes were gloomy. The Monster Research Institute uses humans as fodder to raise monsters. The heat in their bodies is comparable to that of an intermediate hunter. But they volunteered to become the rations of the monsters. If it was only 1 or 2, then it could be understood that they were being coerced by the Monster Research Institute. But there are hundreds of them. 100 people at a time. What kind of amazing number would it be if it was 10 times or 100 times? From this point alone, Dean could feel the terrifying means of the Monster Research Institute. Even if he used drugs to control addicts, he may not be able to drive so many people to voluntarily die. Moreover, they died in such a horrible way. No wonder there are only 9 major systems in the temple. But I didn't see any architect or God's blessing. The consortium said that it was given by the temple, but the temple got it from the Monster Research Institute in the inner wall. Dean was startled. The temple got it from the Monster Research Institute? Doesn't it mean that the temple will regularly come to the Monster Research Institute to collect it? There were people coming and going. It meant that the inner wall wasn't an absolute isolation. If there was a gap, then there would be a chance to sneak in. If there is no way to climb the giant wall, then perhaps it is possible to sneak into the inner wall from the team that regularly collects the blessings. Perhaps this is the unspoken rule that the temple has known for a long time. Dean thought. Whoosh! The three of them sneaked through the wilderness and returned to the outer wall. The three of them came to the giant wall of the inner wall. Dean took Gwyneth and Glenn to climb the giant wall and returned to the outer wall. There are people patrolling the giant wall and the high wall of the inner wall. In the next few days you should explore their patrol pattern. Dean returned to the wilderness of the outer wall. He looked for the horse he had ridden before and said to both of them. Gwyneth and Glenn nodded. I will try to think of another way to help you sneak into the inner wall. These two routes are safer, Dean said as he rode the horse. If there were patrols on the giant wall during the day, then it would be too dangerous for both of them to pass the message to the inner wall. After all, they didn't hesitate to rely on rope. Once the ropes were removed, they wouldn't be able to climb up again. He had already planned to make a small hot air balloon and a glider for them as soon as he returned to ensure their safety during the landing. It was early in the morning. The three of them had spent 4 or 5 hours going back and forth to the inner wall. It was curfew time when they returned to the outer wall. The sound of horses' hooves was particularly loud. Dean stopped at a courier station. Glenn understood. She jumped off the horse and kicked open the door. She picked up the frightened boss from his bed like a chicken and asked for a carriage. The three of them drove back to the castle. Glenn acted as the coachman and inserted another flag of the temple from her backpack into the carriage. Along the way, when they met patrolling soldiers, she simply said a few words and returned to the Tyza River unimpeded. Dean was sitting in the carriage thinking. Suddenly he felt 4 or 5 red lights flashing in front of him. He couldn't help but be startled. He looked up and his face changed. He saw that these red lights were hidden all over his castle, exuding scorching heat. In the direction of the castle hall, there were a few weak fireflies gathered together. All of them were in human shape. Ambush! The idea flashed in Dean's mind as he asked Glenn to stop the car. Glenn was puzzled. What's wrong? Dean was surprised as he looked at the castle. The people who were lurking there didn't emit any smell. Their bodies were much more exuberant than Glenn's. They were like the saint he met during the day. Most of the people who dared to ambush him in his castle were from the inner wall. Turn around and go to the Knight's Hall, Dean said. There is an ambush at home. Glenn and Gwyneth were surprised but didn't doubt Dean's words. Both of them knew that Dean's strength was much higher than theirs. What a fast movement! Dean's heart was slightly cold. He thought that they would come tomorrow at the earliest. He didn't expect that they would come tonight. Fortunately, he had ordered everything. Otherwise, it would be too passive. Suddenly, the horse that was pulling the carriage screamed loudly. The 3 people in the carriage were shocked. Bang! Bang! Dean pulled Gwyneth out of the carriage and fell on the ground 7 or 8 meters away. His pupils slightly shrank as he saw that the carriage he was sitting in was swept by a thick black whip. It was broken from the middle. At the same time, a red figure suddenly appeared in his wide field of vision. It was like a giant eagle swooping down towards Dean. Dean felt a murderous aura shrouding him. He pushed away Gwyneth, who was next to him, and quickly took out the dagger from his leg to attack the oncoming figure. Ding! A burst of sparks came out. Whoosh! The figure swung the black whip in his hand and danced towards Dudian. Dean took out another dagger and quickly blocked it. The moment he touched it, he heard a hissing sound. He turned his head and couldn't help but be shocked. The black whip was actually a living snake. The snake opened its mouth and spat out a transparent venom. Dean was caught off guard and the venom hit his left arm. He was shocked and angry. He quickly waved his right fist to block the venom. Whoosh! The snake's head quickly retracted and coiled around the arm of the previous person. The person also stopped and looked at Dean with interest. There was a bit of surprise in his eyes. Whoosh! 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 At the same time, from the castle in the distance, several figures quickly came over. Dean's face slightly changed as he deeply looked at the figure in front of him. He had bright golden hair and was wearing platinum armor. There were exquisite patterns on his shoulders. His face was reflected on the mirror on his chest. He was holding a black whip in his hand. The handle was the handle of the whip, but the body of the whip was slightly twisting. It was clearly a black snake. Dean took a deep breath. Monastery? The blond youth faintly smiled. Yes, I'm the third captain of the monastery's saints, Francis. Are you the legendary master who injured one of our saints, Mr. Dean? Duddian narrowed his eyes. Are you here to silence me? Chapter 446. Please. Dean coldly snorted as he saw several figures rushing out of the castle. He knew that it would be difficult to end today. The way you invite people from the inner wall is very special. Francis smiled. It's our style to use a special way to invite special people. Please cooperate with us, Mr. Dean. Dean replied. Don't forget that I'm a Golden Knight of the Knight's Hall. If you want me to go back with you, then please show me the handwritten order. It's windy here. If you want to see the handwritten order, then go back to your castle. Francis chuckled. Mr. Dean shouldn't try to escape. You have been poisoned by my magic frost snake. If you don't have the antidote, then you will soon die. Dean narrowed his eyes. Although his eyes were still staring at Francis, he had seen the wound on his left hand. Through his X-ray vision, he could see a thin layer of ice crystal under the wound on his left shoulder. It was the transparent venom that was spat out by the snake whip. It didn't spread in the shoulder, but it was frozen into ice. At some point, it seemed that the disadvantages could be turned into advantages. Dean was grateful for his ice blood disease. I'll go with you. But the temple and the Knight's Hall must know about the forcible arrest of me. Otherwise I will doubt your identity. Are you people from the inner wall, or are you the villains of the Dark Church? 09 small say, net. Francis seemed to have expected this. He smiled and made a please gesture. Dean followed them back to the castle. Glenn and Gwyneth were surrounded by the other saints as they returned to the castle. Dean saw a saint youth in platinum armor standing in the living room. He was wearing the same standard armor as Francis. There was a black scabbard on his back. His posture was straight, and his posture was straight. Sergei, Nicholas, Macon and others were sitting on the sofa next to the saint. They were shocked when they saw Dean. Macon stood up. Dean, run! They are here to catch you. Bang! The saint in the living room swung his leg and kicked Macon's body. Macon flew out from the sofa and hit the wall. He coughed up blood and fainted on the spot. Dean could clearly see that 4 or 5 ribs on Mason's chest were broken. Obviously, this was the result of the saint's actions. Otherwise, Mason's body would have been cut into 2 parts by this kick. Even so, he still felt a surge of anger and murderous intent. He took a step forward, and the blood in his body surged as if it was burning. With a low roar, he shot out like a cannonball and punched the chest of the young holy disciple. The saint's face changed as he raised his hand to block. Whoosh! Dean's fist hit the saint's arm. It was the first time he used all of his strength since he got the magic marks from the splitter. With a loud bang, the fist hit the sleeve of his arm. The platinum sleeve suddenly dented and deformed. The young saint's face instantly changed. Just when he wanted to step back to reduce the force, there was already an intense pain coming from his arm. His body suddenly flew out and crashed into the stairs behind him. With a few clangs, the wooden stairs were smashed into pieces. He fell into a cloud of dust, his body covered in dust. He looked extremely embarrassed. Stop! Francis, who was walking from behind, scolded. Dean's eyes were full of killing intent. His mind was full of anger. He had the impulse to start a massacre, but his reason restrained his footsteps. He knew that if he killed all the saints, then he would face the full force of the monastery. He couldn't afford it at the moment, so he could only endure. Whoosh! A figure came out from behind Francis and helped the saint to stand up. There was a trace of blood on the corner of the saint's mouth. His neatly combed blonde hair was messy and stained with sawdust. His face was full of anger. He grabbed the hilt of his sword and wanted to counterattack. "Stop!" Francis shouted again. The young holy disciple looked at him, gritted his teeth, and let go. Dean looked at the saint and said to Glenn, "Let's go and see Macon." He could not move. Francis and the other saints had already surrounded him. A slight move in one part would cause a chain reaction. "Yes." Glenn's figure flashed as she arrived in front of Macon. She touched his chest and said to Dean, "Several of his ribs are broken. Stabilize the injury first," Dean said. Glenn nodded. She took off the clothes and bandaged the unconscious Macon. Dean turned to Francis. "Is this the behavior of the saints? Injuring innocent civilians at will?" Francis took back his eyes from the saint's body. He frowned as he saw Dean's angry questioning tone. "We are just being cautious. Not to mention that he took the initiative to meddle. You are now a suspect of colluding with the Dark Church. He reported to you. It's a crime of covering up. It's good that we didn't kill him on the spot." Dean angrily said, "Even if I'm a suspect, even if he is covering up for me, according to the law, he shouldn't be treated like this." "Generally speaking, no." Francis indifferently smiled. "But as you said, he is just a civilian. He isn't a so-called noble. A small civilian dare to cover up a suspected criminal. It's good that we didn't kill him on the spot." Dean understood the meaning of his words. The strictness of the law depended on the identity of the target. This made him feel resentful in his heart. He had a feeling of returning to the time when he was ignorant and was taken to the castle by the two hunters to test his physique. At that time, he also hated this feeling of being in a damned situation. What about the handwritten order? Dean suppressed his anger and didn't continue the topic. "This is our identity medal." Francis smiled as he took out a medal and handed it to Dean. "This medal can prove our identity. As for the handwritten order, I'm sorry, but when we come to the outer wall, we only use verbal orders. There is no handwritten order." Dean's face sank. His eyes flashed as he took the medal that Francis was about to take back. He carefully looked at it from the front to the back. Francis and others were surprised for a moment as they saw Dean's action. They couldn't help but laugh. Francis laughed. "No need to look at it. It's absolutely real. It's more real than gold." Chapter 447. "Mr. Dean, it's so late at night. Where did you go?" Francis looked at Dean with interest. Dean indifferently replied, "Do I need to report to you about this?" Francis smiled. "I'm just curious. How did Mr. Dean sneak into the inner wall?" Dean was surprised. Sneak into the inner wall? He suddenly turned around and looked at Sergei and others on the sofa. Sergei secretly pointed to Crone, who was sitting alone on another sofa. Dean was startled. Crone's face turned pale as he saw Dean looking at him. "Dean, I'm sorry. I was forced to confess." Dean's blood was shivering. Sham's departure had disappointed him. But he never expected that Crone, who he had brought out from the slums, would betray him. Moreover, at such a critical moment. Francis looked at Dean's trembling shoulders and glanced at Dean's clenched fists. "Mr. Dean, to be honest, we were also shocked. We didn't dare to think about sneaking into the inner wall. I'm really curious as to what method you used to sneak in." Dean stared at Crone. "Why?" Crone's body trembled. "Dean, don't get excited." Crone's body trembled. "Dean, don't get too excited. I didn't mean it. If I don't speak, then they will kill me. You have seen that they don't care about us civilians. I don't want to die. I'm sorry. I really don't want to die. Everything will be gone if I die. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Dean had never felt so angry and disappointed. It was like the time when the girl's eyes pierced through his body in the prison. He thought that he wouldn't feel heartache after that incident. But he didn't expect that one day he would fall again. Moreover, he would fall into the hands of people who he didn't guard against. His hands trembled uncontrollably. He gritted his teeth and said, "Crone, anyone can betray me, but you can't. You can't betray me." Crone turned his head and gritted his teeth. "I don't want to die. I know you brought me out of the slums and let me live a good life. Let me experience the feeling of being respected. But I really don't want to die. I'm still so young. I'd rather continue to live in the orphanage than die so early." Dean's heart twitched. "Are you so afraid of death? They didn't say anything but you." "Why? Yes, I'm so afraid of death." Crone turned to look at Dudian. "Don't look at me like that. It's as if you are disappointed and sad about me. Haha, you did bring me out of the slums, but in your eyes I was just a tool. You used me to do things for you. You used me to cover for you. You are very suspicious. You don't dare to use others, so you can only use me." Dean stared at him deeply. "Do you know why I used you?" Crone was startled. "Why? Of course it was because of trust." After a moment of silence, Crone slowly said, "You trust me because you know me. You know that I can't live without you. So you can trust me. Haha. In your eyes I'm just a useless cripple. If I leave you I won't be able to survive in the commercial district. So you can trust me without any worries. If you really treat me as your partner, then I'll be loyal to you. Although I'm afraid of death, but at least I'm willing to sacrifice myself for my friends. But you are not my friend. You are my master. Don't forget that I have to call you young master. I'm just a servant under your hands. You brought me and Barton to Old Foulene to teach. You want us to help you in the future. Do you dare to say that you are not using us? You got so many magic marks. You gave them to others, but you didn't give me any rare magic marks. With your ability, if you want to get a rare magic mark, won't it be a piece of cake? You didn't really intend to cultivate me. The 3 people you brought are your best friends, but one of them is gone. You are so black-hearted, so vicious, so insidious and despicable. I have seen it all. You are not the Dean I knew in the orphanage. You are a worse person than all the bad people I have ever seen. You are a devil. When you have real trusted subordinates, you will abandon me sooner or later, just like how you treated your adoptive parents. You will place me in a random place and give me some money. I'm not even sure if you will treat me like that. Maybe you will treat me even worse." Dean listened to his words, and his heart was getting colder and colder. He suddenly felt that the whole world was playing a big joke on him. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. The disappointment and pain on his face had recovered. There was no expression on his face. He said, "Are you done?" Crone slightly gritted his teeth. "I'm done. I know that I'm sorry for you. I'll go to the inner wall and worship you." "Go to the inner wall?" Dean was silent for a moment. "I didn't give you rare magic marks because I didn't want you to get involved in the war. My intuition told me that magic marks are not a good thing. I don't need to give them to you. I won't let you participate in the war. Magic marks are useless to you." Crone's face turned gloomy. "Do you think that I will believe? You don't have to believe me." Dean indifferently said, "I'm just telling you my thoughts. It has nothing to do with me whether you believe me or not. As for the reason that you think that I treat my adoptive parents that way, there is a reason. They adopted a new child and their family is very happy. My adoptive father Gray's dream is to live in the commercial district. I helped him to complete it. My adoptive mother Jura is a good person. I don't want her to be involved in my life. I don't want her to suffer like you are now. You are held hostage and unable to resist. You will die at any time. You say that I'm vicious and despicable. Yes, I treat my enemies like that. They put me in prison and I will pay them back 100 times, but when have I ever been vicious to you? Have I ever used your life to do things for me? Crone was startled. Sergei and Nicholas, who were sitting on the sofa, were silent. Gabriel slightly pursed his lips as he looked at Dean, who was surrounded by Francis and several saints. There was sadness in his eyes. Dean turned to Francis. "When are we leaving?" Francis looked at him. "Don't be so anxious. I can guess one or two things even if you don't tell me. You are able to sneak into the inner wall through the transportation team of the Monster Research Institute. You are much more powerful than I thought." Dean indifferently said, "I don't want to talk to you." Francis shrugged his shoulders. "All right, you go and pack up your things. Bring your daily necessities and valuables with you. You might have to stay in the monastery for a period of time after going to the inner wall." Dean looked at him. He knew that most of the time he had searched the castle. Now he wanted him to take the initiative to bring some of his private things. He estimated that when the time comes, they would take it away. "All right." Dean turned and went upstairs. The other saints didn't follow Dudian and allowed him to go upstairs. Dean didn't look for the superchip that was stored in the secret compartment. He took some of his clothes and his own animal hair toothbrush. He put them in his backpack and went downstairs. Francis winked to the left and right as he saw him go downstairs. Two saints jumped from the collapsed stairs to the second floor. They followed the smell of Dean and went back to the first floor. They shook their heads at Francis. Francis looked at Dudian. "Mr. Dean is really incorruptible." Dean indifferently said, "I only have one request. Don't hurt the others. They are just my servants. You can suspect me of colluding with the Dark Church or killing people. It has nothing to do with them. I hope that the monastery can be like the Holy Church and at least do a good job on the surface." Francis chuckled. "Don't say that. It seems like we are bad." Dean was too lazy to answer. "Let's go." Francis turned and waved. The two saints quickly left the hall and led the mounts from the river behind the castle over. They were 6 lions with snow-white fur all over their bodies. They were nearly 2 meters tall and had a majestic physique. 2 snow-white fangs were exposed, scaring the horses in the manner into neighing non-stop. "Please." Francis smiled. The 4 saints jumped on the back of a snow lion. Dean also walked towards a snow lion. When the snow lion saw Dean approaching, it growled and opened its bloody mouth, revealing its fangs and mouth. If it moved forward, it could directly swallow Dean, but it was obviously just roaring to intimidate him. Dean was in a bad mood. His eyes flashed coldly as he saw the beast roar. He also roared. The snow lion saw the green in Dean's eyes. Its roar turned into a low whine as it drooped its head. Dean coldly snorted, pressed its head, turned over and jumped on its back to sit down. The saints were surprised. The snow lion was a beast of light cultivated by the monastery. It had an unruly nature. Even the saints had to spend months or even years to become partners with it. They didn't expect that Dean would tame it with just a roar. Francis's eyes lit up as he walked to the front of the snow lion. He took out a pill. "This is the antidote to curb the spread of the poison. Although it can't detoxify you, but it will allow you to reach the inner wall." Dean looked at it and smelled it. He put it into his mouth but didn't swallow it. Instead, he hid it outside his teeth. After all, the venom on the snake whip had frozen in his shoulder and lost its effect. If this one was also poison, then there was no way to save him. "Elder! Elder!" At this moment, Crone rushed out of the hall. Francis turned around and said, "What is it? What else do you want to say?" Crone replied, "Elder, didn't you promise me that you would take me to the inner wall? If I stay here, they will definitely kill me." Francis shook his head as he saw that Crone didn't have any news to say. He jumped on the back of his snow lion. "I'm sorry, but not everyone can enter the inner wall. Especially a disabled person like you." Crone was stunned. The next moment, his body trembled with anger. His face turned red as he said, You don't keep your word. Aren't you from the monastery? Aren't you from the Holy Church? How can you break your word? Chapter 448. You! Crone's eyes were red and his body was trembling. He clenched his fists and teeth as he thought of something. It was as if he was grasping the last straw. Elder, it will inevitably damage the reputation of the Holy Church and the monastery if you do this. Even if I'm killed, but there are other people here who will spread the news. Sergei, Nicholas, and the others who had rushed into the hall were shocked. They clenched their fists as they looked at him angrily. Dean, who was sitting on the back of another snow lion, suddenly shot out a cold light from his indifferent and ruthless eyes. Francis deliberately tilted his head. That's reasonable. He turned to Dean. What do you think? Dean's eyes slowly moved away from Crone. He stared at Francis' eyes. I advise you not to do such a stupid thing. Francis squinted his eyes and suddenly smiled. I think so too. We are saints, not devils. If it's not necessary, we don't want to kill people. Moreover, they will only be charged with the crime of covering up. The magistrate will deal with it. Crone said in a hurry. Elder, take me with you. If you think I'm a burden, then you can leave me in a small town in the inner wall. I beg you. Small town? Francis sneered. He stroked the fur of his snow lion and said, You'll have to ask my baby whether it's willing to let you sit on it or not. Crone was startled. His expression turned ugly, but he still squeezed out a smile and said carefully to the ferocious-looking snow lion, Can I sit on your back? Roar. The snow lion that Francis was sitting on growled at him. Crone's heart was beating fast. He was so scared that he took 2 steps back. His face was pale, and he nervously raised his head to look at Francis on the back of the snow lion. He said in a trembling voice, Sir, did it agree? Francis laughed and said, What do you think? The other man laughed. It told you to get out of here. This is a light beast. Do you think you are worthy to sit on it? His words immediately drew laughter from the others. Crone's face turned pale as he hurriedly begged, Your Excellency, I beg you, how about I ride a horse with you? You promised me you must keep your word. Otherwise, if the news spreads out, it will have a bad influence on you. Do you think I care? Francis smiled. Moreover, how can a horse keep up with us? But Crone was about to continue to plead, but Francis lifted the reins. Snow Lion shook its head and turned away. Its tail swept in front of Crone. Crone was so scared that he stopped in his tracks. After Francis and the others had gone 7 or 8 meters away, Crone reacted and hurriedly chased after them. My lord, please! After chasing for more than 20 meters, Francis and the others had already run hundreds of meters away and gradually disappeared into the night. A whoosh, whoosh. 6 snow lions left the Tyza River and ran along the streets of the aristocracy. They took a detour to the commercial suburbs. This way they could avoid the curfew soldiers and delay their time. After arriving at the suburbs, Francis took the lead and led the way. The other 4 people sandwiched Dean in the middle, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. The snow lion looked sturdy, but its speed was incomparably fast. It could walk on any terrain as if it was flat ground. Occasionally, it would encounter some steep hills and swamps, but it could also easily leap over them. Unless it encountered an extremely dangerous terrain, it could maintain a straight line forward, which greatly increased the speed of marching. Everyone was silent. Dean, Francis and others came to the high wall of the inner wall after an hour or so. Francis led the way and ran parallel to the high wall. After a moment they came to a door arched inside the high wall. There was a saint riding a snow lion waiting for them. His hands were wrapped in gauze. It was the blonde saint that Dean saw during the day. The blonde saint's face sank as he saw Dean. He subconsciously raised his hand to block his bandaged arm. He didn't want Dean to see his injury during the day. Open the door, Francis whispered. The blonde youth nodded slightly. He raised his fist and pounded on the door, producing a series of sounds of varying intensity. After a while, the door slowly opened. There were two people wearing standard armor behind the door. Their bodies exuded an amazing heat which wasn't inferior to the saints present. Dean recognized them at first glance. They were wearing the same uniform as the patrols on the top of the wall. Apparently they came from the same force. Francis was the first to enter. After the group of people came in, the two young men in standard armor closed the wooden door together and twisted the stone valve on the side. With a rumbling sound, a heavy stone door slowly descended from the groove in the wall behind the wooden door, blocking the passage. "Thank you very much." Francis thanked the two young men in uniform. He patted the snow lion and said, "Let's go." Then he took the lead. Everyone maintained their previous formation and followed closely behind. The blonde saint whose arm was injured was at the end of the line. He blocked the only gap in the passage. Dean's face was calm as he saw that they were on alert. He didn't plan to escape halfway. He didn't make any big mistakes and didn't offend any big shot. There was no need for the inner wall to put him in a dead end. As long as there was a glimmer of hope, then there would be a chance to make a comeback. After all, the Knights' Hall had promised to keep him safe. If he ran away now, then he would be accused of a crime. Then he would have to hide in the dark of the outer wall. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to escape death. If he lurked in the dark, then the development would be too slow. Once he was betrayed, then he would be beyond redemption. Moreover, after the betrayal of Crone, he realized that the only person he could trust was himself. In addition, the emotional trust of others was far more reliable than the benefits and deterrence. Although the benefits and deterrence weren't as reliable as emotional factors, but the possibility of rebellion would be higher if someone gave them higher benefits and deterrence. Although emotions were unstable, but sometimes they could be indestructible. Dean's thoughts drifted away as he thought of this. He felt that he was very weak. He had a lot to learn compared to the nobles, warlords, rulers and others. It wasn't just about the knowledge and strength of the nobles. It was about being a person. Hunters were strong, but they were ordered by the nobles who didn't have the strength to truss a chicken. No matter how brave he would ultimately be fighting alone, a general without an army. In the jungle world, the law of the jungle is the law of the jungle. If you want to be the king of the beasts, then you have to be more fierce than the other beasts. You have to play the characteristics of the beast to the extreme. But this is the human society after all. Your own strength is only a guarantee of your own safety. The ancients said that it is easy to conquer the country but difficult to defend it. You have to rely on force to make people convinced. You can't bite half an inch of the country even if you grind your teeth. But when it comes to defending, suppressing people's mouths with brute force alone is like guarding a river. If this goes on for a long time, it will inevitably lead to an even more violent counterattack. Brute force is only a deterrent. Only a glib tongue can convince people and make them obey. If you want to be the ruler of all people, then you have to understand the people. You have to know how to be a person better than everyone else. Kind mouth but ruthless heart. Crone betrayed me today. He thought that I was despicable and evil. I told him all my plans in front of him without reservation. He didn't consider what the bystanders would think of me when they heard my vicious plans. So he was afraid of me and thought that I had no bottom line. He thought that I would treat him the same way in the future. This is my failure and a lesson for me. Fortunately, this lesson isn't too heavy. Dean was jolting along with the snow lion while reflecting on today's events and the feelings in his heart. "Mr. Dean, what are you thinking about?" At this time Francis turned his head and smiled at Dean. Dean's thoughts shrank as his eyes regained focus. He looked around the wilderness. "Nothing. I'm just wondering why we are still in the wilderness after running for so long." Francis smiled. The people from the outer wall ask the same question when they come here for the first time. You will know the answer in the future if you have a future. Dean indifferently said, Are you trying to provoke me to run away? I'm not guilty, so why would I be afraid of you? Guilty or not, it's not up to you to say. Francis laughed. Dean wrinkled his brows but remained silent. The team continued to be silent for more than 3 hours. Francis said, "We are almost there. Let's hurry up so that we can go back and rest." Great. Poor cat. I didn't feed it at night. It's probably starving, a female saint on the left said in a sad tone. Francis smiled and said, "This is the last bit of the journey. Let's keep our spirits up." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.